Jewish people. So I'm just wondering, are we ever going to see anything like that on the streets of Britain? Could we ever see anything like that on the streets of Britain? Are British Jews safe over here? In other news, ex-offenders will not have to tell employers of their criminal records, so thieves, drug dealers, etc. They're saying that this is so we can get more people in work. Is that deception? If you are an employer, should you have a right to know whether or not somebody has got a criminal record? We will also be discussing this. The King is off to Kenya shortly. He's going to be doing a royal visit there. But there are these calls now for him to apologise for Britain's past. Does the King owe Kenya an apology? And finally, this is a cause very close to my heart, very close to all of our GB News viewers and listeners' hearts. It is the Poppy Appeal. So what we're doing here at GB News is that we are trying to raise a bit of money for the Royal British Legion. I'll tell you a lot more about exactly what we're going to do later on in the show, but we've got a Just Giving page set up at the moment, and it's justgiving.com/page/GB News Poppy. That's justgiving.com/page/GB News Poppy. We're trying to raise 10 grand for the Royal British Legion. More information on what we're doing and why we're doing it very, very shortly. Patrick Christys, GB News. Heck of a lot on the agenda today. There'll also be a couple of other stories I've not had time to fit into the wall there, so make sure you stay with us. gbviews@gbnews.com is that email address. I want to hear from you. I'll go to the inbox today, but I'll see you the other side of your headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 3. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. The government has held an emergency meeting to discuss the threat of terrorism linked to the Israel-Hamas conflict. Cabinet ministers, including the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, were joined by the Met Police Commissioner. The Prime Minister is also expected to speak to national security officials. It follows a rise in anti-Semitic and Islamophobic incidents across the country since the start of October. The UK's current terror threat stands at substantial, which means an attack is likely. Meanwhile, Gaza's facing an air and artillery bombardment as Israel's ground offensive into the Strip continues. Tanks and troops are pressing into the enclave, with the Israel Defense Forces saying more than 600 military targets have been hit in the past few days. Airstrikes have also been reported near Gazan hospitals, with Israel accusing Hamas of hiding military infrastructure in medical facilities. The Palestinian Red Crescent says it's been warned by Israeli authorities to immediately evacuate the Al-Quds hospital, where 14,000 people are being sheltered. The Home Secretary has described pro-Palestinian protests in the UK as hate marches. Suella Braverman says since the 7th of October attacks by Hamas, we've seen people chanting for the erasure of Israel from the map.
We've seen now tens of thousands of people take to the streets following the massacre of Jewish people, the single largest loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust, chanting for the erasure of Israel from the map. To my mind, there's only one way to describe those marches. They are hate marches. What the police have made clear is that they are concerned that there's a large number of bad actors who are deliberately operating beneath the criminal threshold in a way which you or I, or the vast majority of British people, would consider to be utterly odious.
AI tools will be rolled out in classrooms across England. That's according to the Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak says the technology will help reduce teachers' workloads, with AI designing lesson plans and quizzes. It's part of a £2 million investment in new classroom technology, which is equivalent to employing around 40 teachers. Ministers claim the funding will allow for a personalised AI assistant in every classroom. More wet weather is set to bring disruption to several parts of the country ahead of the arrival of Storm Ciaran this week. Heavy rain is expected in southern and southeast England, as well as Northern Ireland. The Environment Agency has issued 72 flood warnings ahead of the storm on Wednesday night. The Met Office is warning Storm Ciaran could bring gusts of up to 90 miles an hour as it hits southern parts of England and Wales. Major disruption is expected across ports and meat processing plants in Northern Ireland as government vets start a 5-day strike. Members of the NIPSA union, who work in the Veterinary Service Animal Health Group, are walking out until Friday. They're involved in checks on animals and some food products entering Northern Ireland from Great Britain, as our Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie explains.
Government vets going on strike here will cause considerable disruption to Northern Ireland's food chain. Because of post-Brexit arrangements, all food arriving here in red lanes must be inspected. And now the EU are requesting that those products travel to the Republic of Ireland, and this will take time and inevitably higher costs. The unions are insisting that the Secretary of State talks to them as their members' workload has become much greater due to the framework document.
Boris Johnson's former private secretary says there was a systematic failure on coronavirus. Speaking at the COVID-19 inquiry, Martin Reynolds says the scale of the issues and that looked enormous at the time. When questioned whether he knew about the NHS capacity during the pandemic, Mr Reynolds said the situation should have been tracked more closely. He also accused Boris Johnson of blowing hot and cold on some issues during coronavirus. Moscow has accused Ukraine of staging a provocation after hundreds of rioters in Russia stormed Dagestan airport. Videos on social media show an angry crowd running through the airport searching for Jewish passengers arriving on a flight from Tel Aviv. Rioters were waving Palestinian flags and they broke down glass doors and tried to overturn a police patrol truck. At least 20 people have been injured and around 60 have been arrested. Kyiv says it has nothing to do with the unrest. More than 60 Just Stop Oil protesters have been arrested following a demonstration in London this morning. It's after 65 activists have been marching to demand an end to new oil and gas. Dozens of demonstrators laid down on a road near Parliament Square in Westminster. Met Police arrested 62 people under Section 7 of the Public Order Act. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying, play GB News. Now it's back to Patrick.
The threat of extremism in Britain is growing by the day. Yes, there is a war between Israel and Hamas, but there is also a war for Britain's streets. There is an urgent Cobra meeting taking place. There is talk of increasing the terror threat level to its highest possible level. And the Met Police want clarity and possibly a change in the law as well to make it easier for them to arrest and prosecute people behaving like radicals. I find it hard to believe that there is a gap in the law that means that police can stand by and watch people climbing statues and letting off flares. The head of the Met Police says that there's a lot of law around terrorism and hate speech, but not a lot about extremism. I don't really want to believe this. I really don't want to believe that this is true. But are the Met and potentially other police forces just sitting on their hands so that they don't do that dreaded thing of inflaming racial tensions? Well, the counter-extremism strategy appears to say extremism is the vocal or active opposition to our fundamental values, including democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty and respect and tolerance for different faiths and beliefs. We also regard calls for the death of members of our armed forces as extremist. Right, OK, well, that's interesting. And obviously you've just been looking at some clips there of people letting off flares at statues around the capital and the police telling them to get down. But there are other issues taking place at the moment, aren't there? I think we've got a clip to play for you very shortly as well. This clip.
We'll have an intifada. From London to Gaza. We'll have an intifada.
Yeah, there you go. So intifada is what they're calling for there. That apparently means a shaking off or an uprising. Right. Well, is that not extremism? Is this not at least a public order offence in light of everything that we're seeing taking place at the moment? I think it's kind of one step down from jihad, isn't it? This stuff poses a clear and direct threat to our way of life. Now, I want to show you something now that is already happening, OK? And you can bet your bottom dollar that it's going to happen a heck of a lot more in the run-up to Christmas. A Christmas festival at Kensington Palace, the largest ice skating event in London, has actually already been cancelled. So they say that it's due to recent world events which have affected safety and security in the area near our venue. We've made the decision in consultation with the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea to postpone this winter's event at Kensington Palace to next year. It's going to happen all over the place, isn't it? You just know it. Extremism and the threat of terrorism is affecting our way of life. Things that were normal, things that we enjoy doing, we now can't do because events on a different continent have riled up terrorist sleeper cells in this country. The cenotaph has been barricaded off to protect it from protesters defacing it. That's a complete capitulation, if you ask me. But have a little look and a listen to this as well, because police and government inaction over calls for an intifada or jihad on Britain's streets actually feeds into other types of extremism as well. Now, the far right will be getting very riled up over this. Now, we had a bit of a taste of what those kinds of clashes might look like on Saturday. Now, shortly, I'm going to play you a little video. And before I do that, I want to say that I am not accusing anybody in this clip of being either a fascist or an Islamist. This is just some footage of a skirmish near the cenotaph. Can hear the words white trash being shouted quite a lot there, can't we? But I actually walked through Westminster on Saturday and I saw children as young as 5 years old with loudspeakers shouting about Israel being a terrorist state. I saw that with my own eyes. It was cheered on by their parents and other adults. I saw people with their faces covered chanting about Britain having blood on its hands. Now, at the very least, every Saturday, parts of the country are now a no-go zone for Jewish people. Well, that's outrageous, isn't it? It's intimidating for everybody else as well. Do our police force and our government and other politicians and all the usual bleeding heart liberals not understand that normal, ordinary people want to be able to do normal, ordinary things with their families and not feel the need to constantly look over their shoulder for the nearest exit, not consider whether or not to go to something like a Winter Wonderland event in case somebody attacks it? We did not consent to living like this. Well, that's what I think. I want to hear from you. You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.com. We are going to go to our security editor, Mark White. Mark's in Tel Aviv for us. And Mark, a bit closer to home than where you are, there's been a Cobra meeting taking place, and ministers and members of the armed forces, etc., gathering to discuss whether or not we're going to be increasing our terrorism threats, talk about extremism on the streets of Britain. What do we know?
Well, what they were talking about really was concerns about the escalation in tensions, what that is doing to communities, real concern about the impact on the Jewish community, but also some concern as well about anti-Muslim attacks that have taken place. And what they were not talking about was increasing the terror threat, because that is done independently of ministers. That's done by a body called JTAC, the Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre, that's made up of those specialists from the security services who analyse the potential threat facing the UK. At the moment, it's at its median level, so substantial. There are 2 rungs to go to get it up to critical, which would mean that we are in the midst, effectively, of a terrorist attack. Severe is a place it was at for quite a few years, meaning an attack was highly likely, especially during those attacks in 2017. Now, it might be, Patrick, that JTAC, in analysing what the potential threat is because of the situation in Israel, may decide that it will be raised in the days ahead, but we've had no indication that that is in their planning, and frankly we don't get an indication. This all happens at a very top secret level, and then eventually they'll publish what that decision is for the public to take the appropriate precautions if it is raised up to that severe threat level or even potentially higher.
Yeah, Mark, now I'm just going to play some footage and audio of Suella Braverman, our Home Secretary, recently. She's been talking about the scenes that we've been seeing and are no doubt going to continue to see on the streets of Britain. She had some very, very strong words. I'll throw it over to Suella and then we'll react.
Let me explain what we've seen over the last few weekends. We've seen now tens of thousands of people take to the streets following the massacre of Jewish people, the single largest loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust, chanting for the erasure of Israel from the map. To my mind, there's only one way to describe those marches. They are hate marches.
It's incredibly strong stuff. She is already receiving a lot of criticism for that. Whether or not that is appropriate for everybody who attends those marches or just a pocket of them, I think the jury is out, actually, to be honest. When you do actually go to these marches, I think it is reasonable to say that there is at least an undercurrent of something incredibly serious, although, of course, that doesn't apply to everybody on these marches. But the Met Police, Mark, are calling for more clarity, aren't they, when it comes to the law over extremism, terrorism and hate speech. And for the average layman like me, I find that quite confusing, really. Mark Rowley does want clarity, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean, the government has agreed to look at the laws surrounding extremism. If there is anything that they can tweak, then they will do that. But quite frankly, there have been increases in the powers given to the police in recent months and years to deal with a number of different protest scenarios. And the Just Stop Oil was the latest one that brought about quite a few law changes that allowed the police to move in very specifically to remove people from public areas, from streets and things like that. It's different in terms of what's being chanted, but you know, I think the politicians are right when they say that the police do have powers. They have powers under the Public Order Act. They have powers under hate speech and under incitement that they could use. The difficulty is often for the police when they're dealing with, well, 100,000 at least who attended that massive protest at the weekend, that going in mob-handed to try and arrest people at the scene can actually just inflame the situation, make it far worse, from local pockets of disorder and people who are chanting some very inappropriate things and are actually, you know, what they're doing is tantamount to hate speech or incitement. From that, it can descend into, you know, full-scale disorder. So what often happens is you will see at these protests quite a few officers going about with video cameras and stills cameras, and they capture images of those involved in that. And then we will see, I have no doubt, in the days and weeks ahead, significant numbers of people that are rounded up, that are arrested and are then charged with offences around hate crime and incitement alike. But of course, when people see this kind of hatred that is being spilled by certain sectors of these protests, they want immediate action. They want these people arrested, as they've seen in previous protests when it was protests that were counter-protests to the likes of the Black Lives Matter protests, when the police were right in there and making significant numbers of arrests. They see it as double standards, a lot of people do.
I mean, there is some... By the way, if you're listening on radio, I know a lot of people are listening on radio right now, I would just urge you at some point to go onto our YouTube and scan back to this exact time, 3:20 at the moment, and have a look at some of the footage that we're showing you on your television screens, or if you're watching online right now, of individuals with their masks on, with flares atop the statues in London. We've already played clips of people shouting about intifada, which is some kind of... describing it as kind of one step below jihad in a way, talking of a kind of shaking off of oppression, so-called, but from London to Gaza, you know, I would argue that is, you know, a severe threat, verbal threat to our established way of life and our normal law and order that we've got in this country, our cultural norms, our societal norms. And for many people, I think, watching this, they will be surprised that things like this are not deemed to be extreme enough to get nicked for. That said, as you've rightly pointed out, Mark, the police have got a very, very tricky job here, and the body cam footage that we can see in some of the videos here will be used, will be stored up, and we may well end up getting those kind of retrospective arrests. Look, Mark, just finally and quickly, whilst I've got you, you are in Tel Aviv for us right now. Any word on any British hostages that Hamas took?
Well, it depends how you determine what a hostage is, because there is real concern about the 200-odd foreign nationals, British nationals or dual nationals currently in Gaza at the moment, who it's being reported, are being prevented from leaving Gaza by Hamas. The Egyptian and Israeli governments have agreed to allow foreign nationals across the border into Egypt through the Rafah crossing, but Hamas has not agreed to that. So effectively, those, and it's 200 we know about, the Foreign Office believes actually there could be quite a few more British nationals or dual nationals in Gaza who haven't yet made contact with them. And this, of course, is on top of the handful of hostages that we believe are being held by Hamas as hostages, probably in the tunnel networks underneath Gaza. I should say, in terms of a breaking development in the last hour or so, we got a development in the psychological warfare from Hamas. We were always expecting this, and now it's come. The first hostage video, 3 women speaking on that video, one of them criticising Benjamin Netanyahu for not agreeing to a ceasefire. But of course, you know, this woman speaking clearly under duress, you know, being held by these Hamas terrorists at that point. But it does pile more pressure, of course, on the Israeli government as they've gone in now. That ground war is continuing apace.
Mark, thank you very much. Mark White there, our man in Tel Aviv, our security editor, talking about the latest from over there, but also the ongoing scenes here. Now, look, something that I know a lot of people are concerned about. We've got Remembrance Sunday coming up a couple of weeks away. If we've got these continued protests taking place, how does that square with, you know, our armed forces walking through the streets of London, walking past the cenotaph, which is currently barricaded? How does that chime with us paying respects to our fallen soldiers and those, of course, who are still with us as well? This is one of the reasons why I have today launched a Just Giving page. More on this in the next hour, a lot more on this in the next hour about exactly what we're going to be doing to raise money, exactly how we're going to be doing it. But just an early heads up for you, justgiving.com/page/GBNews OK, so it's justgiving.com/page/GBNews I'm trying to raise 10 grand for the Royal British Legion to help with their poppy appeal, to help with all of the work that they do. I think now, right now, given everything that's going on the streets of Britain, we need to let our veterans know that we do care about them. And already, thanks to you wonderful people, we have raised £700. So that has just happened like that, because you are amazing. So, look, more on this. Again, I'll tell you how to donate more and all of that stuff in the coming hour. But, yes, coming up, the growing safety concerns for British Jews. It comes after a mob stormed Russia's Dagestan airport in search of Jewish passengers from Israel. I'm Patrick Christys, this is GB News, and we are Britain's news channel.
Who is it?
We're here for the show.
This time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Put your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back. It's 3:27. You are watching or listening to me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Loads more still to come, including a plan to allow ex-cons, ex-offenders, to take jobs without declaring their criminal record to their employer. And the King visits Kenya tomorrow. Some say that he should apologise for Britain's role in slavery. Should he? What do you think? But we've seen protests here in the UK as pro-Palestinian protesters climbed over war memorials and statues, but even more shocking scenes in Dagestan in Russia as a mob stormed the airport in search of Jews. In medieval scenes, the attempted pogrom stormed the runway and rocked cars in a search for anyone from Israel, waving their Palestinian banners as they went. They stormed the airport. I mean, look, I can't believe this either, but it did happen. So they stormed the airport. They'd heard that a flight was landing from Tel Aviv. So the word obviously went round, clearly, that Jews must be landing in Dagestan. Cue, what would you say, it's thousands, isn't it, of people legging it through an airport, going room to room to room, breaking down doors in the airport, smashing through customs. There we go. People getting onto the tarmac. There was a bizarre clip of one guy, again, I'm not joking here, so this was the brains of Dagestan, this chap, looking into the jet's engine to see if maybe a Jewish person had been hiding in the plane's engine on the flight from Tel Aviv. Yeah, I know. But it's terrifying stuff, though, isn't it? Now, I know this is obviously quite a long way away in Dagestan, but it is concerning nonetheless, and I just want to know whether or not anything like this, we think, could ever happen here. Joining me now is David Rose, who's Politics and Investigations Editor at the Jewish Chronicle. David, thank you for joining me. Shocking scenes from Dagestan there. Firstly, what do you make of that?
Well, of course, what's happening in Dagestan is appalling. But unfortunately, we are dealing with a situation in the United Kingdom, which, while not yet as serious or as dramatic as that, nevertheless raises great concern. On Friday, the Community Security Trust put out one of its regular bulletins. The CST is the organisation set up by the Jewish community that works closely with the police and other authorities to protect Jewish individuals and sites such as synagogues. Anyway, according to their Friday bulletin, there have now been more anti-Semitic incidents recorded in the UK in the 3 weeks that this war has been taking place, and in the whole of the rest of the year, a higher number than they've ever recorded in a 3-week period ever. 805 incidents, of which 64, very alarmingly, took place against students on university campuses. And there were getting on for 100 examples either of assaults or threats to carry out such assaults on the streets. So very clearly, here you have a situation where Jewish people have become victims of appalling terrorism in Israel. And now, instead of showing, as it were, empathy for that, we have a situation in which anti-Semites based in Britain are seeing this as the excuse to declare open season on Britain's Jewish community.
Yeah, I mean, it's been like nothing on the same scale. There has been reports of Islamophobia as well, and kind of clashes that have taken place. But in terms of the anti-Semitism threat, we like to think, don't we, that nothing like the scenes from this airport in Dagestan could ever happen here. But I can't help but wonder whether or not we're sitting in a tinderbox at the moment. I went to some of those protests on Saturday to have a look around. I think it's important. If I'm going to sit here and talk about them every single week, I should show my face at some point. And David, it's a no-go zone for Jews in London, isn't it?
Let me tell you an anecdote which I've just received in conversation with a friend about an hour ago. On Sunday, his son was due to play a football game and came home in tears. He was a member of a team set up by a Jewish youth organisation about to play a game against the non-Jewish youth team in an area of North London where lots of Jews live. The opposing team did not show up in strength. They only had 9 players because 2 of the parents of footballers on the opposing team had decided that they didn't want them to be playing Jews. What we have seen in the past 3 weeks is something that is new to me in my lifetime, which is that opposition to Israel seems in this country to have crossed over into outright displays of anti-Semitism. And just because people are Jewish, they are being shunned, they are being discriminated against, they are being abused and attacked. Now, this is, we have seen militant or vociferous anti-Israel, anti-Zionist protest in previous episodes of conflict between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip, notably in 2021. But this, to me, is something of a wholly different order, where the parents of kids living in a prosperous area of North London don't want their kids to play Jews.
Yeah, shocking. I'm going to follow that up with you, actually, David, if that's all right. We'll do that off air. David Rose, thank you very much. As Politics and Investigations Editor at the Jewish Chronicle. Shocking stuff, isn't it? Look, I've got loads more coming your way, including more on this fundraiser, by the way. I'll give you loads more detail on this. It's justgiving.com/page/GBNews Poppy. It's a fundraiser for the Royal British Legion. I'll tell you about what I'm doing and what we're going to do going forward and why I'm doing it, in light, frankly, of the cenotaph being barricaded off. We've already raised £1,000 now, £1,100 of the £10,000 total. It's happened like that. We haven't even got started yet, so thank you. But first, it's your lovely headlines. Let's go for that.
It's 3:33. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. We start with some breaking news. A police officer charged with murder following the fatal shooting of Chris Cabba will be named publicly. The officer's name and date of birth will be made public on the 30th of January. Their home address or any image of them cannot be published. Mr. Cabba died when he was shot through the windscreen of a car in southeast London last year. The government has held an emergency meeting to discuss the threat of terrorism linked to the Israel-Hamas conflict. It follows a rise in anti-Semitic and Islamophobic incidents across the country since the start of October. The UK's current terror threat stands at substantial, which means an attack is likely. In other news, artificial intelligence tools will be rolled out in classrooms across England. The Prime Minister says the technology will help reduce teachers' workloads, with AI designing lesson plans and quizzes. It's part of a £2 million investment in new classroom technology, which is equivalent to employing around 40 teachers. And you can get more of all those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2158 and €1.1448. The price of gold is £1,644 and 57 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,325 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Welcome back. Now, are former criminals about to be handed a lifeline by the government. So under new government plans, convicted burglars and drug dealers will not have to disclose their past crimes to employers in an attempt to cut reoffending. Announcing the plans, Justice Secretary Alex Chalk said that being forced to admit their past crimes can be a barrier to former criminals trying to reintegrate into society. Under the changes, prison sentences of 4 years or more for crimes deemed less serious will become spent after a 7-year period of rehabilitation. OK, well, to give us his thoughts on this story is Mark Johnson, who's a former prisoner and the founder of Lived Expert, a charity that seeks to prevent reoffending. Look, Mark, thank you very, very much. Great to have you on the show. I can see both sides of this, but should an employer not have a right to know if they're employing somebody who's been done for theft or burglary?
Yeah, I don't think it's... I'm with you, actually. There's a for and against. Yeah, I think that it's going to be a lifeline for a lot of people, as you've previously said. I think the question is to an employer, they want to be informed about the risks of that person. And what's not in this sort of announcement is what the risks are. There's also lots of nuances and caveats to it. So, for instance, there isn't a list of where you could find your conviction really clearly to know whether you don't have to disclose it. And then if you go on to the disclosure and barring service, there is a list of things that won't get filtered if you apply for certain jobs. So there's a lot of detail to this that's not very clear. But ultimately, it comes down to a criminal record is a list of everything that you've done wrong in your life. And what doesn't counteract that is everything that you've done right. And surely, like in our civil society, you know, you want people, if they've committed a crime, they get sentenced. The sentence is the punishment. But actually, through that punishment, i.e. the criminal justice system, there should be a record of everything that they've done that gives you confidence that they wouldn't do the same thing on release. So I'll give you an example, like 30% of people that go to prison don't get reconvicted. There's no distinction about whether those are small crimes or big ones. So somebody who's done some serious violent crime, for instance, who've learnt a lesson in prison, would never reoffend again, yet they'll be the ones that have to disclose their convictions all the way through.
Yeah.
So it's quite for me, it's quite a lazy policy.
OK, I can see that. I suppose there's the question of deterrence. So if you thought that if you go and rob that shop, for example, and you get caught and then you get a criminal record, that might mean that you will be very unlikely to be able to get a job again in future, maybe that might put you off doing it. But if you knew that you could go there, nick a set of trainers or something and get caught, and then you don't have to tell a future employer, I suppose that's less of a barrier to stopping you doing it, is it?
Patrick, our society's changed, right? Where the haves and the have-nots have become detached from one another. And there is a perverse incentive, actually, to think the other way. So why should I bother, right? So why should I bother changing when every time I apply for a job, I'm having to get rejected from 100 job applicants, right? Why should I have to tell everybody about everything that I've done wrong, but they don't ask for anything that I've done right? So what you get is this subterranean existence of going, you know what, a life of crime is better.
Well, I think that's what they're doing. I think that's what they're trying to do, isn't it? Because if they say, right, look, realistically, if we currently have a system whereby somebody who has been done for drug dealing, even if that's relatively low level, I'm not diminishing it, but even if it's relatively low level, or theft or something, just absolutely can't get a job after that, and then you release them back out onto the streets, then realistically, what do we expect them to do? They're going to do that again. They're going to want to earn more money than they'll get on the dole, so they're probably going to commit some kind of crime. So I can definitely see it from that perspective. I absolutely can. Yeah. Could you understand why some people might say, if I own a pub and I employ someone, you know, and I don't know they've got a history of theft, and I toss them the keys one night and say, look, could you lock up for me tonight and do the tills? And then it turns out that, you know, they've been done for that. That could be an issue, right?
Well, strangely, on the list of the barring list, so there's no list for what you fall into this category where you don't have to disclose, but on the barring list, fraud doesn't come into it. So that is actually a crime that I consider one that's deception and fraudulent behaviour is a crime, whether it's a small crime or not. That for me, that is a risk factor in employing people with a conviction. So I'll just throw another nuance into this. Insurance companies, I'm an ex-offender. My convictions are such a long time ago. I've helped blimmin' thousands of people and organisations and policymakers change their view on certain things. Yet when I phone an insurance company for house insurance, I have to pay an extra premium because I've got a criminal conviction.
Yeah.
And this policy doesn't cover that. So there's another caveat to the exclusion from back into society. What we need is a list of things that people, and this is, think about it rationally. If you've done something wrong, I need you to tell me everything that you've put in place to mitigate that chance of that happening ever again.
Yeah.
And it's not there. This policy here is a blanket policy of going, no matter what you've done, no matter what your mind frame is. And then I'll go to employers. Martin Walker, the owner of Iceland, said to me, I would employ more people, but I just don't know enough about the risks. So what he's saying to me there is employers need to be informed about the risks and have safeguards to it, not just a blanket government policy, which I might add is very convenient in the situation we're now in, where the criminal justice system is in chaos.
Well, I suspect has quite possibly got something to do with it. Yes. Look, thank you very, very much, Mark. Always a pleasure, and good luck to you. Take care. It's Mark Johnson there, former prisoner, the founder of Lived Expert, a charity that seeks to prevent reoffending. I can genuinely see both sides of it. I can see that if I was an employer and I didn't know that somebody had got a criminal record, and then I employed them and then they committed exactly the kind of crime that they'd been sentenced for earlier on, I'd feel a bit miffed that at no point that they had to disclose that to me. But there are a lot of people who do genuinely become rehabilitated. A lot of people who maybe for whatever reason found themselves in a situation where they were stupid, when they were young, and they committed a crime that they will never commit again. And those people shouldn't be banned from having jobs in this country. But still to come. The King visits Kenya tomorrow. Some want him to use it as an opportunity to say sorry for Britain's colonial past. OK, then. We'll have a chat about that. Patrick Christys, GB News, Britain's News Channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new
It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio. Welcome back. It is 3:45. You're watching or listening to me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Now, the King and Queen have flown to Kenya for a 5-day state visit today, but amongst visiting Nairobi National Park and meeting Kenyan Marines, Buckingham Palace says the trip will acknowledge the painful aspects of UK and Kenya's shared history. His Majesty will take time to deepen his understanding of the wrongs suffered by Kenyan people, apparently. So, there are calls for him to apologise. I'm just going to very quickly, straight off the bat, go to one of the emails that I've had in so far from Chris in Cambridge. I sincerely hope His Majesty does not apologise to Kenya for the past on my behalf. That's Chris's view. Get those views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.com. So, should the King apologise? Will he? Who better to talk to about this than royal correspondent and fan favourite here at GB News? It's Michael Cole. Michael, thank you very, very much. Will the King apologise? What for as well?
I think what we will hear are plenty of expressions of sincere regret for some of the painful aspects of our shared colonial past. But the King, you know, is quite a fan of Jeeves and Wooster, and I'm sure he took note of P.G. Wodehouse, the author of those stories, who said, it is a good rule in life never to apologise. The right sort of people do not want apologies, and the wrong sort take a mean advantage of them. The problem with apologies is that once they're made, they open up a Pandora's box, a legal Pandora's box. And I think that the King will follow the example of the then Foreign Secretary, William Hague, in 2013, which was the 50th anniversary of Kenya's independence, when he expressed very fully regret and he made a comprehensive statement about what had happened. And it's worth remembering, I think there we see the King with members of the Commonwealth. And of course, this is his first Commonwealth visit. The first 2 visits were, of course, to Germany and to France. It's worth remembering this Mau Mau emergency went on for 10 years. There's some dispute about how many people who died, but a reliable figure, I think, is 11,000 people were killed on the Mau Mau side, on the guerrilla freedom movement side. And on the other side, there were 32 white settlers who were killed in very gruesome circumstances, and more than 1,000 people who were loyal to the crown at that time. It caused a lot of controversy. It was a very brutal war. There were massacres on both sides. And as I'm sure the King will be stressing, there's regret about that. It was a different time. This emergency began shortly after the Queen, who was in Kenya when she actually became Queen in February 1952, and it went on from 1953 for another 10 years until Kenya achieved its independence in 1963.
Do we need to apologise today, though? And the concern would be, Michael, you know, we had the Ngozi Fulani issue, didn't we? Marlene Hadley, and there was an apology about that, and then that led to calls for more apologies, and then you're saying sorry for everything, and then and then it's kind of this death spiral of apology that I think a lot of people don't really want. And you know, if people today haven't had anything been directly responsible for anything that's taken place in the past, you know, should our king be apologising on our behalf now?
I don't believe so. I think we've moved on.
OK, sorry, Michael, we've got a slight issue with Michael's connection there, but no matter. I think we got the gist. It's Michael Cole there, who's the royal correspondent. We're going to have a debate on that in the next hour. OK, so we're going to have a debate on whether or not the king should be apologising for Britain, basically, in Kenya. This does give me an opportunity to just delve quickly into the inbox very quickly. This is on the reoffending story. People are pointing out to me, so this is about criminals not having to disclose their criminal record to employers and whether or not that's a good thing. People pointing out that Timpsons in Iceland apparently do have a ex-con work scheme, which I do think is a good thing in the right circumstances. But Michael's been on, he says, absolutely no, we shouldn't be apologising for anything to Kenya. And that view is echoed, it must be said at the moment, throughout the inbox, gbviews@gbnews.com. But keep those coming in. Maybe you think we should, let me know. But now, last week, we spoke about Britain's loneliest sheep, a ewe which has been spotted all alone and overgrown. Can relate. In the Scottish Highlands. But despite GB News' inbox being flooded with concerned emails, some of which have been asking us to send out a rescue party, yep, they have, really, it seems that the ewe might have to face another winter alone, as the Scottish SPCA are reassuring that the sheep that's said to be living on the foot of a cliff for the past 2 years now isn't in danger and has ample grazing. Apparently, they will not be saving our sheep. The SOS there has fallen on deaf ears. A lot of concern for the lonely sheep, Britain's loneliest sheep, but apparently the sheep's fine and that's all OK. Now, I just want to let you know about something that we are doing here on this show. So, it's about the Royal British Legion, it's about the Poppy Appeal. In the last few weeks, I know that there's been growing concern about unrest in this country and about the desecration, maybe, of our history and where we're at. And I think that's been brought into sharp focus by what we've seen with the barricading off at the Cenotaph and certainly some of the scenes around London with some of the protests that have been taking place. And I read an article a couple of weeks ago in Brighton where they could not find somebody to replace a long-standing poppy seller. And they raised about 10 grand in Brighton last year, apparently, and they were struggling to find somebody to go out and do the Poppy Appeal there. So tomorrow I'm going to go to Brighton, and we're going to do a whole show from Brighton, and we're going to be at the Royal British Legion venue there, at the War Memorial, and out and about. And we want to try to raise 10 grand for the Royal British Legion. It's not just for the area of Brighton, of course, it's right across the country. And the Royal British Legion do a heck of a lot of work for armed forces families, for people who have served in this country, who maybe need help getting employment, who need help with mental health, who need help trying to find a house. And again, I'm going to be talking a lot more about that in the next hour. But justgiving.com/page/GB News Poppy. That's justgiving.com/page/GB News Poppy is the website where you can go and make a donation. Now, we haven't even really got stuck right into this yet, but we've already raised, now we'll refresh my screen live on national television now, 1,652 quid in like 50 minutes. Thank you very much, everybody. Of our total £10,000, this is amazing. We're 16% of the way there already. And we've had Debbie in, happy to support. She's chucked a tenner in. Thank you, Debbie. Denise has given us 20 quid. We've got loads of people. You don't have to give your name. You can give any amount, even just a couple of quid. I've chucked in a tenner. I'll put more in. Don't worry, I just wanted to get the ball rolling. But it's justgiving.com/page/GB News Poppy. Let's do our bit to show our veterans some love in these very testing times. Patrick Christys, GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Later this week, Wednesday night and into Thursday, Storm Ciaran will arrive, bringing some very strong winds. But even before that, we're likely to have problems with heavy rain. A number of Met Office warnings have been issued. Low pressure will dominate the weather throughout this week. And the heavy rain returning tonight across Northern Ireland in the east, potentially going to cause disruption. We're particularly concerned about flooding. There is a Met Office amber warning in place here, along with a broader yellow warning. Heavy showers across Wales will spread into parts of northern England, across the Midlands through the early hours. Most of Scotland having a dry night. Quite a chilly one here. Touch of frost certainly on the cards for the south. Temperatures holding up at 9 or 10 Celsius.
On to Tuesday, and it'll be a case of some places seeing sunny spells, but there will also be still some heavy showers. The rain should ease through the morning in Northern Ireland at least, but there'll be still some heavy bursts in the morning first thing, and we'll see heavy showers across northern and eastern England, and then more rain coming into the southwest later on. In between, much of Wales, parts of the Midlands having some sunshine through the afternoon, and again most of Scotland actually dry and fine. On the chilly side here with single-digit temperatures, but further south we should at least get into the teens. But the winds will be picking up as the rain arrives. That isn't Storm Ciaran though. That arrives on Wednesday night and into Thursday. The isobars really squeezing together. Very strong winds likely, particularly in the south, and more heavy rain, bringing the potential for further flooding.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good afternoon, it's 4 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News. Heck of a lot to go at today. Terror fears on the streets. There are calls for the terror threat to be raised to its highest level. The Met Police, they want clarity over what's terror, what's a hate crime, what's extremism. Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, has said that what's taking place at the moment are hate marches. I want to know whether or not you still feel safe on Britain's streets. Did you ever? In other news, yes, this is a cause that's very close to my heart, and I know to a lot of yours as well. We're doing a campaign here at GB News just over the course of the next couple of days, just trying to raise 10 grand for the Royal British Legion. They're finding it difficult in some parts of the country to find people to volunteer to give poppies out, so they're missing out on money there, potentially. Tomorrow I'm going to be doing a big show, a bit of a road show. I'll be telling you about that in a second, but yeah, we've got a Just Giving account at the moment, justgiving.com/page/GB News Poppy. We're trying to raise 10 grand for the British Legion. More on the details of this in a second. And we've got this story as well. The King going to Kenya with the Queen. Should he apologise for Britain's history? There are calls for him to apologise for the past, our colonial history, the slave trade, etc. Do you think he should? Do you want him apologising on your behalf? We'll also be discussing this story. The COVID inquiry rolls on. I'm normally not that bothered about the COVID inquiry. However, it's Bring Your Own Booze Day. Yes, that's right. So the chap who basically organised a lot of the parties at the COVID at number 10 Downing Street when the COVID situation was taking place has been giving evidence, right? So we're going to go to that. We're going to hear from that. Patrick Christys, GB News. I'll also tell you a rather bizarre story about nuns going on the run with some fine artwork. So it's nuns on the run. Yes. gbviews@gbnews.com is that email address. Get your views coming in, probably on some of the more serious topics that we've had there. Do you feel safe on the streets of Britain? Should we raise that terror threat, do you think? But right now it's the headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
Very good afternoon to you. It's a minute past 1. Let's get you up to date with the headlines. The Home Secretary's described pro-Palestine protests across the UK as hate marches. Earlier today, the government and police held an emergency Cobra meeting to discuss the threat of terrorism linked to the Israel-Hamas conflict. The UK's current terror threat stands at substantial, which means an attack is likely. The meeting follows a rise in anti-Semitic and Islamophobic incidents across the country since the start of October. Suella Braverman says it's unacceptable.
We've seen now tens of thousands of people take to the streets following the massacre of Jewish people, the single largest loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust, chanting for the erasure of Israel from the map. To my mind, there's only one way to describe those marches. They are hate marches. What the police have made clear is that they are concerned that there's a large number of bad actors who are deliberately operating beneath the criminal threshold in a way which you or I, or the vast majority of British people, would consider to be utterly odious.
Meanwhile, Hamas has released new footage of 3 hostages who are being held in Gaza. The video shows 3 women sitting side by side, criticising Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and asking to be taken home in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. Mr Netanyahu's condemned the video as cruel psychological propaganda. The families of those being held captive, though, say the video's given them hope.
It feels good to know that some of them are okay. I can't say what this video means, but to see that there's a chance that our beloved people are alive.
It gives us a lot of hope to see that they're still alive. We haven't given up on them yet. We know they're alive and we're going to do anything we can to bring them back. We're not going to stop.
Well, Gaza is facing an ongoing air and artillery bombardment as Israel's ground offensive continues. Tanks and troops are pressing into the enclave, with the Israel Defense Forces saying more than 600 military targets have been hit in the last few days. Airstrikes have also been reported near Gazan hospitals, with Israel accusing Hamas of hiding military infrastructure in medical facilities. The Palestinian Red Crescent, though, says it's been warned by Israeli authorities to immediately evacuate the Al-Quds hospital, where some 14,000 people are understood to be sheltering. The police officer charged with murder following the fatal shooting of Chris Kabo will be named publicly. The officer's name and date of birth will be made public on the 30th of January. Their home address or any image of them, though, cannot be published. Mr Kabo died when he was shot through the windscreen of a car in south-east London last year. More wet weather is set to bring disruption to several parts of the country ahead of the arrival of Storm Ciaran this week. There's potential for flooding and transport disruption in Northern Ireland amid an amber rain warning. Heavy rains also expected in southern and southeastern England. The Met Office is warning that wind of up to 90 miles an hour are expected in some places. Major disruptions expected across ports and meat processing plants in Northern Ireland as government vets begin a 5-day strike. Members of the NIPSA union who work in the Veterinary Service Animal Health Group are walking out until Friday. Now, they're involved in checks on animals and some food products entering Northern Ireland from Great Britain. As our reporter there, Dougie Beattie, explains.
Government vets going on strike here will cause considerable disruption to Northern Ireland's food chain. Because of post-Brexit arrangements, all food arriving here in Red Lanes must be inspected. And now the EU are requesting that those products travel to the Republic of Ireland, and this will take time and inevitably higher costs. The unions are insisting that the Secretary of State talks to them as their members' workload has become much greater due to the framework document.
Boris Johnson's former private secretary says there was a systematic failure on coronavirus. Speaking at the COVID-19 inquiry, Martin Reynolds says the scale of the issues at that time looked enormous. When questioned whether he knew about the NHS capacity during the pandemic, Mr Reynolds said the situation could have been tracked more closely. He also accused Boris Johnson of blowing hot and cold on some issues during coronavirus. Well, more than 60 Just Stop Oil protesters have been arrested following a demonstration in London this morning. It's after 65 activists have been marching to demand an end to new oil and gas. Dozens of demonstrators laid down on the road near Parliament Square in Westminster. The Met Police arrested 62 people under Section 7 of the Public Order Act. We are live across the UK on TV, on digital radio, and if you want us on your smart speaker, just say, play GB News. That's it. Now back to Patrick.
We are gearing up for Remembrance Sunday amidst an incredibly febrile and hostile atmosphere in this country. In a couple of weeks, military heroes will march past the cenotaph in London. The same cenotaph that is currently barricaded up to protect it from being damaged by protesters angry about what's going on in Gaza. We've got clashes taking place on the street right now next to the cenotaph, the memorial to our fallen heroes, the people who laid down their lives for our freedoms and our way of life. And it turns my stomach. I wonder what those brave men and women must be thinking right now. I wonder what they'd think if they saw people calling for jihad and Muslim armies and stuff like that. We have soldiers being told not to wear their uniforms in public in case they become targets for terrorists. We have heroic wartime leaders like Winston Churchill being denounced as evil, bigoted villains. We have veterans struggling with crippling mental health issues as a result of their service, struggling to access the resources that should be more easily available to them. Many of them, sadly, turn to drink and drugs or even take their own lives. We have people who were prepared to fight and die for this country in more recent conflicts lining the streets because we don't have enough housing stock for them, when councils and politicians seem able to find billions of pounds collectively for housing stock for those who have just arrived in Britain. And then we look at what's taking place in schools, where children appear to be taught the negatives about Britain's military history and not the overwhelming positives. Is it any wonder, then, that places like Brighton, which is regarded by many as arguably the wokest place in Britain, struggle to find somebody to sell poppies ahead of Remembrance Day? There were serious concerns that a long-standing poppy seller, who sadly can no longer volunteer, could not be replaced. In fact, they only found somebody a couple of days ago. But it got me thinking. Clearly, there are parts of the UK that struggle to raise money for the Royal British Legion, which helps people who have suffered as a result of their service for Queen, now King, and country. It supports, it helps veterans with mental health, to get a job and to adjust to Civvy Street. It helps their families as well. But it does more than that. It does much more than that. In a world where our greatest generation is increasingly forgotten, the heroism of the past is now viewed negatively instead of with the love, awe and adoration that it deserves. In a world where patriotism is all too often seen as a dirty thing, where we feel as though we are no longer proud to be British or allowed to be proud to be British, the Royal British Legion fights the good fight. It epitomises everything that true patriotic Brits love about our nation and our national history. And that is why I am trying to raise 10 grand for the Royal British Legion. I'm asking you, please, to go to justgiving.com/page/GBNews Poppy. That's justgiving.com/page/GBNews Poppy to donate. Just give whatever you can, even if it's a couple of quid. And tomorrow, I am going to be doing a show from Brighton, where they have found it quite tricky to get a volunteer to hand out the poppies. And I'll be focusing on our beloved military veterans. With all the nonsense that's going on in our country at the moment, it is more important than ever that we show our love for our heroes. So please, if you can, just go to justgiving.com/page/GBNews Poppy and just give whatever you can. Let's get to 10K. Well, thank you very much, everybody who's already given some cold, hard cash. I've just refreshed the page in front of me right now on my screen, and remarkably, it's got to 3,828 quid in, like, minutes. So thank you, everybody. Yeah, really, really lovely stuff, this. I think the GB News viewers and listeners as well, whenever you're asked to mobilise for something like this, you always just go way above and beyond. So thank you. Like I said, tomorrow we're going to be doing a bit of a special from Brighton. It made me very angry when I thought that they were really struggling in Brighton to find somebody. So we thought we'd do something about that, and we are doing something about that. So thank you very much, everybody. But, yes, moving on from that for now. The UK terror threat is remaining at substantial, meaning an attack is likely, as ministers have today attended an emergency Cobra meeting amid fears that the ongoing situation in the Middle East could spill over into UK domestic terror threats. It comes as Home Secretary earlier on said that pro-Palestinian protesters who sing from the river to the sea chants are engaging in hate marches amid fears of this extremism becoming commonplace at the protest. We can hear from her now.
Let me explain what we've seen over the last few weekends. We've seen now tens of thousands of people take to the streets following the massacre of Jewish people, the single largest loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust, chanting for the erasure of Israel from the map. To my mind, there's only one way to describe those marches. They are hate marches.
Well, incredibly strong stuff, no doubt. Well, in fact, she is already being criticised by the usual types. But our security editor, Mark White, is with us now. He's over in Tel Aviv. Mark, so this threat remaining at the current level, what does that mean? What are the options going forward in terms of raising the terror threat? What would that mean in a practical sense?
Well, it's at the middle point on that scale. Being substantial, meaning that a terrorist attack is likely. If it was to go up to severe, that means a terrorist attack is highly likely. It was at severe for quite a few years, especially around 2017, when we had multiple terrorist attacks across that year, including, of course, the Westminster attacks, the London Bridge attack, the Manchester bombing. And at one point it went up to critical, which is the highest level on the scale, meaning we are in the midst of a terrorist attack. Now, the terrorism threat level is decided by a body known as JTAC, the Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre. They're made up of intelligence people from the intelligence services who have, of course, at their disposal all of the latest intelligence and threats. So they decide on what the threat level should be, and then they make that public. And of course, the public, but in particular public bodies like the police service, other sort of public buildings and institutions know that they've then got to sort of up their preparedness response as well. So the meeting that took place, the Cobra meeting, really was looking at the issue in terms of community tensions, and there are very significant community tensions with a huge increase in anti-Semitic crimes in recent weeks, and indeed anti-Muslim crimes have gone up as well, not to the same degree, but a great deal of concern. And of course, many Jewish people, not just looking at what has happened on the streets of London with these protests, and we have to say the majority of people taking part in these protests would not wish to do Jewish people any harm. They are expressing their concern as to what is happening in Gaza and the plight of Palestinian people. But there were certainly a significant number of people on these marches who do have hate in their heart for the Jewish people. And they don't just look at that, they look at what's happening around the world, where we have had a number of terrorist attacks that have been linked to what is happening in Israel at the moment. And then these absolutely shocking, appalling scenes from Dagestan, this Russian republic, last night, where this mob of hundreds of people stormed into the main international airport in Dagestan, smashed their way into that airport through secure areas, and actually got out onto the airfield itself through airside, surrounded the aircraft, were demanding that people from this flight that had just come in from Tel Aviv show themselves, reveal themselves, show that they are not Israelis or Jews. And it wasn't just in the airport itself, outside the airport. They were also stopping vehicles that were leaving the airport and demanding that people show their passports and other identifications so it could be ruled out if they were Jewish or not. And at a hotel in Dagestan as well, not far from the airport, where apparently some person had been seen that this mob believed looked like a Jewish person, so surrounded this hotel. And at one point the police let them into the hotel to go and check room by room to make sure there wasn't a Jewish person. Luckily, it seems there wasn't a Jewish person in that hotel, because here in Israel they say that, quite frankly, if they had got a hold of a Jewish person, they would have been lynched.
Yeah. I actually just can't believe we're reporting on this. It's just bonkers. It's absolutely bonkers. Look, Mark, thank you very much. It's really, really concerning times that we've got at the moment. Mark White there, our security editor in Tel Aviv. Yeah. Look, joining me now is Vahid Beheshti, who's a protester and activist. He's an Iranian dissident. Now, people may remember Vahid from the first Saturday of the pro-Palestine protests in London, where people chased him, and then the police found people that had a knife on them that was saying that they were going to attack him. Vahid joins me now. Thank you very much. Now, Vahid, I understand that you were there witnessing some of the more violent clashes that took place at the weekend. I think we've got you. Vahid, some of the... it's all right, we'll go back to him, don't worry. I'll fill you in a bit more on why we're actually going to go to him in just a second, because there were some violent clashes at and around Westminster and around the cenotaph that took place at the weekend. We played a couple of clips of those earlier. If we've still got them, we can maybe whack them up on the screen now. I'll talk you through them if you're listening to us on radio. So we had some issues like this. We also had some others where there were clashes between what were described as British nationalists and protesters as well. The police did make some arrests there, but it was violent scenes, things were being thrown at other people, and it all kind of kicked right off, really. And Vahid actually witnessed those, and it got me thinking about where we really are in terms of racial tensions at the moment on the streets. And one form of extremism that maybe isn't being policed as thoroughly as people would hope, leading to another form of extremism flourishing on the streets. Now, we know, don't we, that the major terror threat in this country is the Islamist terror threat. But we also hear a lot about how the fastest growing terror threat is the far-right terror threat. Now, surely I cannot be the only person concerned that if we continue to see protests on the streets like we see with people climbing statues, with people surrounding the cenotaph, with people kicking off on the streets of Britain and chanting some very nasty things, that could well lead to a mobilisation of far-right activists as well. And then, before you know it, there's the potential, and I think the very real potential, and something that I am hoping does not rear its head on Remembrance Sunday, by the way, of essentially race riots on the streets of Britain. And that is something I am deeply concerned about, and I know a lot of people are as well. We are gearing up for Remembrance Sunday. The police have to play that one incredibly well, because we cannot have footage of our armed forces. I don't want to be sitting here reporting on footage of our armed forces and people connected to the armed forces and our political leaders walking through the streets as an act of remembrance while you have some people climbing statues, chanting about Palestine, letting off smoke bombs, talking about Israel being a terrorist state and Britain having blood on its hands and all of that stuff. I think it would kick off big time, wouldn't it? And something has to be done about that. gbviews@gbnews.com. Unfortunately, we're not going to get to Vahid right now. Hopefully, we'll get him on a little bit later on. But no matter, because I've got a lot more coming your way. Loads more on all of the top stories on our website, which is gbviews@gbnews.com. When I come back, we're going to be having a discussion as to whether or not the King should apologise to the people of Kenya for Britain's role in the slave trade and for colonialism. Of course, it comes amid a state visit there. I am also going to be talking to you about our own poppy appeal here. And while we're raising money for the Royal British Legion, I'm going to be going to Brighton tomorrow. Now, Brighton is one of a few areas in the country where they had struggled to get somebody initially to sell the poppy and to represent the British Legion there. I'm deeply concerned about what we're seeing in this country. I know the cenotaph gets a lot of mention. It's a visible sign, I think, isn't it, of a lack of patriotism and a fundamental disrespect for our war heroes, both dead and alive. So I'm raising a little bit of money, 10 grand hopefully, for the Royal British Legion, who do a lot of work for housing veterans, for mental health and for supporting their families as well. So more on that when I come back, but it's justgiving.com/page/GB News Poppy. And a quick refresh of the screen right now. Bear in mind that this Just Giving, you have known about this you've known about this Just Giving for an hour and 20 minutes and you've raised 7 grand. So I think we're going to have to increase the 10 grand, aren't we? I think we're going to have to bump this up. All right. Thank you, everybody. Much appreciated. Look, Alice has just dropped a tenner in. I had an email in from a chap called Steve in Walsall, and I really appreciate this one, Steve. Just quickly, I want to mention this. He says, look, Patrick, I've not got a lot of money. I've donated £2 to your appeal. Steve, that matters just as much, if not more, mate, as someone lobbing a grand in. So thank you very much. Yeah, more on this when I come back. Patrick Christys, GB News. We are, of course, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio. Veterans have been raising concerns about the safety of war memorials across the UK ahead of Remembrance Sunday in just a couple of weeks' time, after the cenotaph was fenced off last week due to concerns, and it continues to be, by the way, concerns that it will be vandalised by pro-Palestine protesters. With the protesters themselves showing no signs of slowing down, can we be sure that the memorials to our war dead and the Remembrance Day parades themselves will be kept safe and respected? I have massive concerns about this. I have huge concerns about, in a couple of weeks' time, what would happen if something goes badly wrong on Remembrance Sunday. I hope it doesn't. I know we all hope it doesn't, but concerning times out there at the moment on the streets. Let's get the thoughts now of our Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford, who is a veteran, of course, who joins me now. Thank you very, very much. We have launched an appeal. Tomorrow I'm going to be doing a show from Brighton, trying to raise a bit of awareness and raise a bit of money for the Royal British Legion. Brighton struggled to find anybody. They've sorted it now, apparently, but they struggled to find anybody for a while to sell poppies there, and I think that's a visible sign of decline, isn't it, when it comes to people going out of their way to help our armed forces and pay their respects to them. Are you concerned about the level of respect shown to our fallen heroes and our current service personnel?
Good afternoon, Patrick. And first of all, congratulations on your appeal, which looks as if it's going to exceed expectations, which is a good sign, actually, that perhaps we haven't lost touch with our past. But I think the last time I was speaking to you, I did mention that even in my home village of Carmunnock, total population 847, the war memorial was vandalised a few years ago, and the brass plaque commemorating the names of who'd fallen in the First and Second World War was taken away and sold for scrap. So I think there is, as the older generation, the wartime generations, if you like, sadly begin to fade away, and there aren't very many of them left now, we're losing a little bit of touch with what they did to ensure that we live in what is still a free, liberal democracy. And thank goodness we do.
Thank goodness we do as well. Just a reminder that Just Giving page is justgiving.com/page/GB News Poppy. We are now at £9,340. This page has been live for less than an hour and a half. People have known about that and donated. So thank you. Bear in mind our original ambition was to hit 10 grand. I think we're going to have to change that, and that speaks volumes about the GB News viewers and listeners and what you care about. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But, Stuart, I've got to ask you, when you see things like the cenotaph being fenced off, right, and you see the threat that it could be vandalised or desecrated, how does that make you feel?
Well, it makes me feel very sad, actually, because the cenotaph and the many Commonwealth graveyards around the world, probably in more countries than not, plus all the memorials up and down the length of the UK, they are, in fact, Britain's sacred ground. And that fact should be recognised by everybody, even those who don't like the way the government performs or don't like the way the government approaches crises around the world, which we're well aware of at the moment with Gaza and Ukraine and elsewhere. But they need that the protesters need to read the room. And my advice to them would be, stay away on Remembrance Sunday and let the nation mourn. Because if you think that protesting while the nation mourns is going to strengthen your cause, then you're very much mistaken, because Middle Britain will not agree or approve of your actions.
Hear, hear, and well said. And we've hit 10 grand. So there we go. That's taken...
Pretty impressive.
That's taken less than an hour and a half, and the wonderful viewers and listeners of GB News have just lobbed 10 grand at the Royal British Legion, just like that. Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford, thank you very, very much. Great to have you on the show. Look, we're going to keep going, obviously. I really hope that Just Giving doesn't now cut off donations at 10 grand because we've hit our target. I suspect it won't, so please keep giving if you can. JustGiving.com/page/GB News Poppy. The police need to step in and do their job and make sure that the Remembrance Sunday marches and the service and the ceremony that takes place there is not in any way interrupted by a baying mob complaining about something that's happening on a different continent. Loads more still to come between now and 5 o'clock, including some severe weather warnings for parts of the UK as well. But first, it's your latest headlines.
It's 4:30. I'm Aaron Armstrong. Home Secretary Suella Braverman has condemned pro-Palestine protests across the UK as hate marches. Earlier, the government held an emergency meeting to discuss the threat of domestic terrorism linked to the Israel-Hamas conflict. The UK's current terror threat stands as substantial, meaning attack is likely. The police officer charged with murder following the fatal shooting of Chris Kaba will be named publicly on the 30th of January. Mr Kaba died when he was shot through the windscreen of a car in south-east London last year. And more wet weather is set to bring disruption to several parts of the country ahead of the arrival of Storm Ciaran this week. There's potential for flooding and transport disruption in Northern Ireland. There's an amber rain warning there. Heavy rain also expected in the south and southeast parts of England. Yellow weather warnings in place there. More on all of our stories on our website, gbnews.com, and I'll be back in just under half an hour with more.
Well, you heard it mentioned there, but apparently the Met Office has issued an amber warning for rain as Northern Ireland especially braces for Storm Ciaran to bring nasty weather for the week ahead. I hope I pronounced that correctly. It comes as several communities fear being completely cut off by flooding, as some forecasters warn of a risk to life. Joining me now is Alex Burkill, a presenter from the Met Office, to run us through the weather for the week ahead. Alex, what's going on?
Right, it's going to be very unsettled. As you already mentioned, there is an amber warning for Northern Ireland this evening and overnight. That's a separate feature to Storm Ciaran because there is so much unsettled weather around. In parts of Northern Ireland, there's a potential for 75 to 100 millimetres of rain as we go through tonight, and that is enough to cause some fast-flowing floodwater as well as cause some disruption to travel. Could be pretty difficult on the roads for some places, particularly in Northern Ireland as we go through tomorrow morning. But there is more unsettled weather on the way as we go through the next few days. Yes, Storm Ciaran is arriving as we go through Wednesday night into Thursday, and that's going to bring very strong winds, particularly around the English Channel coastal parts in southern UK. Here we could see gusts of 70 to 80, possibly even around 90 miles per hour as we go into Thursday. So it is going to be exceptionally windy and very wet too.
Look, thank you very much for serving up that warning. Make sure we all take care of that. It's Alex Burkill there, a presenter from the Met Office, just to run us through that extreme weather that he's expecting to batter Britain in the days to come. Now, the King and Queen have flown to Kenya for a 5-day state visit today, but amongst visiting Nairobi National Park and meeting Kenyan Marines, Buckingham Palace says that the trip will acknowledge the painful aspects of the UK and Kenya's shared history. His Majesty will take time to deepen his understanding of the wrongs suffered by Kenyan people, apparently. So will the King apologise? Should the King apologise? We're joined now by royal commentator Angela Levin and actor Femi Nylander. Both of you, thank you very, very much. Always a pleasure to have both of you on the show. Much appreciated. Angela, I'll start with you. It's always ladies first on this show. Should the King apologise, and do you think he will?
No, I think it's decided that he's not going to apologise, but he will be very understanding and compassionate. He's been sent there by the government. It wasn't a decision on his part to go and have a nice trip there. But Kenya and the royal family have got on extremely well over many years. They've been independent for 60 years now. It's just coming up to that. So they're keen on being members of the royal family. But there is still this wish after many years that they should get some more money because people weren't given enough in the Mau Mau years in 1952.
Okay, Femi, I'll ask you that question then. Is it about an apology? Is it about reparations? What is it, do you think?
I think it's...
Oh, no, Angela, sorry, Femi, I'm going to go to Femi, Angela. Go on.
Oh, sorry.
Both, of course, both. I mean, if you punch someone in the face, then you should help pay for the hospital bill, and you should, at the same time, apologise for it. It's not either or. In this case, the UK has been involved in atrocities, torture, kind of crimes against humanity in Kenya, and it's never acknowledged. I mean, it's kind of acknowledged that in a very vague way. William Hague in the House of Commons, after kind of being forced to publish documents that they hid themselves for a very long time, and brought basically on a legal brought to court by Kenyan Mau Mau fighters who were tortured. But no, it's never really accepted that responsibility and offered its apologies. And I hear the argument all the time. Well, Charles didn't do that personally, but Charles is supposedly a representative of the United Kingdom. He goes and represents the United Kingdom on the world stage all the time, whether or not that's right or wrong. I'm not a monarchist personally. So if he's a representative of the United Kingdom, then he should be able to apologise on behalf of the United Kingdom. He should be able to, just as at the time that Kenya was a UK colony, Kenya was a UK colony symbolically under the Queen Elizabeth, the late Queen Elizabeth. So the reality is, of course, there should be both. And it doesn't really do anything. It's all apologising does is accept. Like, if I say sorry, it doesn't cost me anything, does it?
Okay. Well, unless there's a reparation to be had afterwards, I suppose. Angela, I'll throw it your way. Do you actually think we've got anything to apologise for?
Well, I mean, in the Mau Mau rebellion, the British people were not good. We all know that. They were violent and they locked people up. So that was a very unfortunate thing to do. But they had been forgiven, and in 2013 they were given £19.9 million by the government. They've also been given roads and schools, and they've been helped in all sorts of things that they have needed. I think that the apology is not really necessary because there is enormous warmth, and it's just people coming back after a long time deciding that they do want reparation. Well, you know, they are independent now, and it's not up to the Commonwealth or King Charles to actually take over anything. So I think the friendship, which is no doubt still going on for all of them. I mean, Prince William asked Catherine to marry him then. The Queen Elizabeth was made queen when her father had died there. Princess Anne has loved it and has managed charities for children ever since. So it's not as if they've been ignored in any way. I think it's just a word, and I think people are very fond of each other both ways.
Okay. Femi, what would you say to that? That there has been an apology. There's been 19 and a bit million quid done, some infrastructure built as well. I mean, what more do we need?
I mean, it's the scale of the torture which was flung on, and there are clear parallels. I've heard a lot of parallels being raised today and in the past few days about the fact that these people were rising in rebellion against an occupying power. And that is something which has been spoken about in the context of what's going on in Israel and Palestine, which the UK itself is supporting today. So there's parallels with the modern world, but the reality is that 19 million for death and people having items shoved up their genitals and people being hung upside down for days and all that. I mean, when you read these reports, you realise how gruesome, it's medieval stuff that the UK was engaging in. And this is not to speak of the rest of the colonial history that the UK has with Kenya and the structural adjustment loans and other colonial relations that the UK has continued to have with East Africa since then. I think that it's good. It's good that there was an acknowledgement in the House of Commons, and it's good that something was paid because it does set a precedent of sorts, but it wasn't really enough. And again, like the UK has not apologised as far as I'm aware.
Angela, I think some... Well, go on, come back to that. I can see you're itching to go. Go on.
I don't think that you can keep on going back. I mean, it was all satisfied. It was all worked up. Everybody was okay with it. There's been very good feelings all the way through. There's a great meal ready this evening, and everybody is very happy with it. So I don't think you want to then keep on and on demanding money. And I think every country around in the Commonwealth will take that up, and they'll want money too.
Well, that's
and I think it just gets too much.
That's my next point that I was going to ask, actually, and Femi, I'll ask it to you now. I suppose, are you of the view that every single Commonwealth country should be getting some form of reparation and a massive apology?
No, I don't think they should.
I mean,
Femi, and then I'll come back to you, Angela.
Right? Not necessarily. I mean, some countries, like, for example, Australia, are very rich themselves, but they are themselves settler colonies, and the populace there are generally descendants of kind of white Europeans. So of course there should be no reparation. I mean, there should be reparation to the indigenous peoples of the Australian, but that may come from the Australian government itself. Of course, these things are complex, and every case needs to be taken on its own basis. But I do think it's disingenuous to say that if this happens, it might lead to a slippery slope where everyone, because whenever there is a good claim, and whenever the UK has done something dodgy, and I have to say it has done a lot of dodgy things in a lot of places that have not been paid for and not been repaired for, then there should be reparatory payment. And if this leads to other things, this isn't a problem, is it?
You know, so of the Portuguese, so of the Spanish, so of the
French, all of these rich European countries are sitting on stolen wealth. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't either.
Yeah, I think I'll go to Angela on this now, really, which is, do you think that, it could well actually prove negative for Charles's base support, as it were, if a lot of staunch royalists see him going out and apologising? I don't know how well that plays with, people...
It's a bit humiliating. The point is that if you are independent, and if you've been independent for 60 years, you cannot then expect to go back to the beginning and say you want money, because it doesn't work like that. They want to stay within the Commonwealth, and they all get on and they talk about things and share anxieties and responsibility. But you can't keep on going back. It's a bit like Harry, who keeps on wanting to get money from his father, regardless of how much he's got himself. I'm not saying they're rich, but they have got now, but they've got an amazing sort of third largest startup ecosystem. And King Charles is helping them with that. There's lots of things like that. And I don't think you can keep on hounding a country for more and more money.
Femi, are there ever calls for things like internal reparations in some of the African countries as well? Because, it wasn't just the case of white people arriving on boats and throwing a net over a load of black people and bringing them in for slaves. There was a lot of, the indigenous population there, the native population there, also helping out with the slave trade, wasn't there? So is there not a case for things like internal reparations? And then does that not make a bit of a mockery about Britain paying reparations? Femi?
No, I mean, well, first of all, 60 years is not that long a time. And, I mean, I think I've said this to you before. I am of the opinion that within Nigeria, not us here on GB News doing whataboutery pointing at it, of course, within Nigeria, within any country where certain people still have wealth that was based on exploitation, within the UK, where loads of very, very wealthy people here today are wealthy because they were given land by the monarchy and feudal lords 500 years ago after a load of people were killed in one village or this, that, the other. None of that.
Oh, we've lost Femi. I suppose the point that I was making there, Angela, I'll go for one final word from you, Angela, which is how far back do we really go here? Do we start going to, the Scandinavian countries for the things the Vikings did? Do we come after the French at some point? In fact, that's working the other way around at the moment. We're giving the French a load of money to not police the channel, aren't we? I am concerned. I am concerned about Charles unwittingly opening the floodgates to you know, a group of people, I'm not talking about the people of Kenya here, I'm talking about, you know, kind of the woke people who maybe do want apologies, for them to start apologising for everything. We saw with Ngozi Fulani, it doesn't work. People want a bit more.
Yes, it'll go on and asking more and more and more. We know that. It would be ridiculous of them if they didn't, actually. I think you do a deal, you stay with it, and then you move forward. I don't think you can keep on all this going backwards and complaining. I think is very bad for everyone. And King Charles is actually someone who is very caring about the Commonwealth, and I don't think that he should be humiliated like that.
OK, well, look, both of you, thank you. Sorry, Femi, that we lost you. We are going to have to call it a day now, but I'll chat to you again very soon, no doubt. Both of you, thank you very, very much. It's Angela Levin, their royal commentator and actor and activist, Femi Nylander. Thank you, both of you. Right, OK, so the inbox is raging on this. I'll go to the inbox shortly, gbviews@gbnews.com. I'll get some of those read out. But an update from the COVID inquiry and what really went on with that infamous bring your own booze email from a Whitehall official. I don't normally care that much about the COVID inquiry, I'm sorry if you do, but I do care about the bring your own booze thing. So I'll be chatting about that. And a little update on the Just Giving. We've hit £20,600 for a fundraiser that started less than 2 hours ago. justgiving.com/page/GBNewsPoppy. Let's show our veterans some love. Thank you very much. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back. It is just coming, it's 10 to 5. You're watching or listening to me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Now, this week, senior Downing Street officials from the height of the COVID pandemic will begin giving evidence to the COVID inquiry, including Dominic Cummings, remember him? Who tomorrow could deliver some devastating blows to former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, which no doubt will make fascinating viewing for GB News viewers as Boris joins our ranks in the new year. But today is the turn of Martin Reynolds, who sent the infamous Bring Your Own Booze email to Number 10 staff amid parties in the garden of Downing Street. Joining me now is Lisa Hartle, our GB News reporter, who's been tuning in, transfixed to this. Lisa, I hope you've not brought your own booze to this event, but what's been going on?
So most of the day we heard from Martin Reynolds, as you mentioned there, the former principal secretary to Boris Johnson when he was the Prime Minister. And he was asked briefly about that garden party, that he sent an email to staff inviting them to bring their own booze. And he was asked, given that many people lost their loved ones, they couldn't be with their loved ones as they were dying, whilst this was happening, and they were asked for his response, to which he said he apologises unreservedly for the part he played in that. Also, the inquiry heard that he turned on the disappearing messages function in a WhatsApp group that he was in with officials, top officials in 2021. When asked why he did this, he said that he couldn't remember, but he could speculate, and he thought perhaps it was because he was worried that someone might screenshot the messages and leak those to the press. He was also asked about the operation of the Cabinet Office as they were preparing for the pandemic, and he told the inquiry it didn't have the plans and processes in place to move from the early stage through to the crisis stage and manage it in a way a normal crisis would be. He also said that in hindsight, ministers should have been far more vigorously looking and testing out pandemic planning, and that there had been a systemic failure on coronavirus, and plans that they did have in place were insufficient. And he was also asked about 10 days in February in 2020, which coincided with the half-term break for schools, when Boris Johnson was apparently not contacted about the pandemic that we heard the news of it breaking and getting out of control in Italy. Reynolds said that he probably should have done more to make that happen, but he said that there were other officials that could also have got in touch with the Prime Minister. Today we also heard from another former private secretary, Imran Sharif, who said that there was a lack of forward planning by government, saying there was too much focus on excessive deaths and not enough focus on preventing those deaths. He also said that with hindsight, they should have spent every day in February planning for COVID. Today we were also supposed to hear from Lee Kane, the former Director of Communications, but due to timings running over, we'll hear from him tomorrow. That alongside with Dominic Cummings, the former Chief of Staff, who will also be presenting evidence to the inquiry tomorrow.
Lisa, thank you very, very much. Lisa Hartle there, our GB News reporter, reporting the latest from the COVID inquiry. Right, now, I always like to finish the hour, if I can, with something a little bit different. Thou shalt not steal. It's number 8 of the 10 Commandments, and the leading ethical and religious principles for Christians and civilised societies. Well, apparently, not for a group of 10 nuns in a villa in Spain. They're not in a villa in Spain, apparently that's the name of the place, who unexpectedly shut up their convent, running off with more than 20 treasured paintings and sculptures. Taking with them a treasured 17th century depiction of Christ, the nuns on the run have sparked outrage, with hundreds of local villagers protesting against the removal of the historical pieces. It seems like the pearly gates won't be opening anytime soon for these Spanish sisters. Seriously, nuns on the run. Who would have thunk it, hey? I'm sure, well, I hope they've got a good reason. I hope the nuns at some point speak out and say they were doing this to protect them from falling into the hands of some kind of evil or something like that. I really hope that this isn't just a collection of nuns on the take. You know, like a Channel 5 documentary, this, isn't it? When nuns snap. But there we go. So, nuns on the run for you there. I'm just going to delve back in now to the fundraiser that we're doing. So, look, I was looking around, I've been looking around now for a couple of weeks at what I've been seeing on the streets especially in London, that's just because where I am at the moment, but no doubt taking place around the country as well, the protests in relation to Gaza and Israel. And I get that there's strong feelings on both sides there, but what absolutely disgusts me is the cenotaph being fenced off and barricaded off, and the idea that that is a massive slap into the face for our fallen heroes. I think that there is an undercurrent at the moment of people who do actually dislike Britain and Britain's history, and with it, I think it brings shame onto people who have fought and died or been injured or given the ultimate sacrifice or whatever for this nation. And I don't like that. And then I found out that in some areas they're struggling to get people to volunteer to sell the poppy for the Royal British Legion. And again, that concerns me. I think right now in this country we are at a very wobbly time, right? A very wobbly time. So justgiving.com/page/GB News Poppy. And one of those areas where they were struggling to raise some money was Brighton. And I'm going to go and do my show from Brighton tomorrow to get some poppies sold and get some money in. But that Just Giving page has now hit £22,739. That's the breaking news. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We started this 2 hours ago, less than 2 hours ago, aiming to raise 10 grand. And now, already in 2 hours, you wonderful people have chucked £22,739, make that £24,715 to the Royal British Legion. We now need to come together, in my view, and show our veterans and show that we care about them, right? And that we do love them and that we are appreciative of everything that they have done for this country, because I think we're standing on a precipice now of a little bit of national hatred, and I don't like that. We're going to be talking more about this in the coming hour. Thank you, everybody. I'm Patrick Christys, this is GB News, and we are Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new t-shirt.
It's your new t-shirt. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle.
Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio. Good evening, it's 5 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News. And is terrorism threatening our way of life? We are starting to see Christmas events cancelled now because of security fears already. So there we go. I'm just wondering whether or not we are now buckling in the face of terrorism in the streets of Britain. Now, the Labour Party, of course, has been copping it recently. And look at this, a new party, the Party of Islam, is trying to register with the Electoral Commission. In fact, they're trying to register with the Electoral Commission very, very shortly after it all kicked off between Israel and Hamas. What will this mean for the electoral landscape in the next general election? If certain aspects of the Muslim community are not going to vote Tory and are not going to vote Labour, could they vote for a new Party of Islam? And what will that mean in terms of majorities, etc.? This actually, seriously, could have a massive impact at the next general election. So we're going to talk about all of that. I'm also going to discuss GB News' Poppy Appeal. Yes, brilliant this. OK, so look, I'm raising money. I initially started it trying to raise 10 grand for the Royal British Legion. In some areas, they've been struggling to get people to volunteer to sell the poppy. I am also very concerned about what I'm seeing at the moment. The cenotaph being barricaded off. We are going to have Remembrance Sunday in a couple of weeks' time. And what I hope we don't see is outrageous protests taking place during that memorial service, but I fear that we might. I wanted to raise a bit of money, justgiving.com/page/GB News Poppy, and you wonderful people have already donated more than £26,000, which is bonkers considering this has only been going for an hour or so. I'm going to be doing my show tomorrow from Brighton. More on this, I'll go into more detail on all of that. In another story now, ex-offenders, so drug dealers and thieves, could not have to disclose their criminal record to employers in a bid to try to get them back on the employment ladder. Is that right? Or do you think that actually employers have a right to know? Is this them getting off scot-free? More on that. And finally, I know, SOS, save our sheep. Look at this fluffy, lovable little thing. Well, it's stranded on its own, apparently, at the bottom of a cliff on a remote Scottish island. And we're not going to be going to save it. OK, the RSPCA has said we're not going to save the sheep. The sheep is happy enough. It's got loads of grass. This has caused massive controversy. Britain's loneliest sheep. Should we be saving our sheep? Patrick Christys, GB News. Yes, and when I come back after the news, we do have a little bit of breaking news to bring you about a Conservative MP that has been asked to resign from their position because they have called officially now for a ceasefire in Israel and Gaza. We'll be telling you exactly who that is and the circumstances surrounding that very, very shortly. But quite significant, a Tory breaking ranks, and it ties in with what we're going to talk about this new Party of Islam. Where's the Labour vote going to go? All of that. So make sure you stay tuned. GB Views at gbnews.com. But right now, it's your headlines with Aaron.
Good evening to you. It's 3 minutes past 5. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. We'll start with some breaking news. The Israeli government confirmed 14 British nationals were among those to die during the Hamas attacks on the 7th of October. 2 others are still missing and they may be held hostage. We'll bring you more on that as soon as we get it. Meanwhile, Israel's Defence Forces says a soldier's been rescued from Gaza. In a post on X, formerly known as Twitter, the IDF says she was found during a ground operation this evening. More on that one as soon as we have some details. Now, that comes as Hamas released new footage of hostages being held in Gaza. This video is showing the families who are watching the video. It shows 3 women sitting side by side in captivity. And the 3 people sitting side by side have been criticising the Prime Minister, asking to be taken home in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. Well, Benjamin Netanyahu's condemned the video as cruel psychological propaganda, but the families of those being held captive say the video's given them hope.
It feels good to know that some of them are okay. I can't say what this video means, but to see that there's a chance that our beloved people are alive.
Gives us a lot of hope to see that they're still alive. We haven't given up on them yet. We know they're alive and we're going to do anything we can to bring them back. We're not going to stop.
Here, the Home Secretary has described pro-Palestine protests across the UK as hate marches. Earlier today, the government and police held an emergency Cobra meeting to discuss the threat of terrorism linked to the Israel-Hamas conflict. The UK's current terror threat level stands at substantial, which means an attack is likely. The meeting follows a rise in anti-Semitic and Islamophobic incidents across the country since the beginning of October. Suella Braverman's urging police officers to take a zero-tolerance approach to anti-Semitism.
We've seen now tens of thousands of people take to the streets following the massacre of Jewish people, the single largest loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust, chanting for the erasure of Israel from the map. To my mind, there's only one way to describe those marches. They are hate marches. What the police have made clear is that they are concerned that there's a large number of bad actors who are deliberately operating beneath the criminal threshold in a way which you or I, or the vast majority of British people, would consider to be utterly odious.
And that bit of breaking news Patrick mentioned a moment ago, Tory MP Paul Bristow has been told to leave his government job as a parliamentary private secretary at the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology after urging Rishi Sunak to back a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. Downing Street has said his comments aren't consistent with the principles of collective responsibility. The police officer charged with murder following the fatal shooting of Chris Cabo will be named publicly. The officer's name and date of birth will be made public on the 30th of January. Their home address or any image of them, though, cannot be published. Mr Cabo died when he was shot through the windscreen of a car in southeast London last year. More wet weather is on the way and it's set to bring disruption to several parts of the country ahead of the arrival of Storm Ciaran this week. Potential for flooding and transport disruption appears to be high in Northern Ireland amid an amber rain warning. A heavy rain also expected in the south and southeast of England. The Met Office is warning that gusts of up to 90 miles an hour are expected in some areas. Just Stop Oil activists who climbed a motorway gantry on the M25 have avoided being jailed at the High Court. 2 protesters were handed suspended sentences for deliberately defying an injunction, while a further 10 were not given any penalty after the judge found they'd not been made aware of the injunction by Just Stop Oil protest organisers. It comes as 62 Just Stop Oil activists were arrested at a demonstration in London this morning after lying down on the road near Parliament Square. Well, more on all of those stories in our later bulletins. For the moment, that's it. Now, back to Patrick.
Welcome along. Well, yeah, we start with this breaking news that Tory MP Paul Bristow has been told to leave his government job as a parliamentary private secretary at the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology after urging Rishi Sunak to back a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. That's according to Number 10. A Number 10 spokesperson said Paul Bristow has been asked to leave his post in government following comments that were not consistent with the principles of collective responsibility. Well, there we go. Our security editor, Mark White, is in Tel Aviv for us right now. Mark, so what is the latest on Paul Bristow? The MP in Peterborough has got quite a marginal seat, I think, with a large Muslim community within that, and he's kind of broken ranks from the Tory lines, hasn't he? He's been asked to quit.
Yes, I mean, he is in the most junior rung of the ministerial ladder, being a private secretary to the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, but nonetheless, because of collective responsibility within government, he has broken ranks with that, so he's been asked to step down. Now, he wrote to the Prime Minister saying that, you know, in light of the fact that thousands of people had been killed because of the operation in Gaza and more than 1 million people had been displaced, he failed to see how that could make Israel any safer. So he's entitled to his viewpoint, but not to publicly express that when you are in government and you have to abide by collective responsibility. So that's why he's gone. And of course, it's different, or certainly the Labour opposition leader, Keir Starmer, has decided to take on a different approach, in that members of his shadow cabinet, who are also voicing similar concerns, he is just saying, you know, they have their viewpoint, that's fine. And, you know, the line of the party is still that he would absolutely back humanitarian pauses, but he doesn't back a permanent ceasefire.
No, indeed. We'll get more on the fallout of all of this very shortly, actually. That is that Paul Bristow MP has been told to quit his government post after calling for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza, kind of breaking ranks. So just tie in with something I'm going to be talking about a bit later on, actually, about the political landscape in Britain actually being changed as a result of this. There's a new party that's looking to be registered with the Electoral Commission called the Party of Islam. They could, well, one conceivably could say, mop up a lot of votes from Labour. What on earth will that mean? There's kind of 30 seats, apparently, that Labour could be now vulnerable to if, and it is a big if, of course, everybody kind of went to that party. So it's fascinating what this is doing to the political landscape. But back where you are, Mark, because we're going to talk about that a bit later on. I understand now that there's been some updates, some of the breaking news in relation to an Israeli soldier, is that right?
Yeah, a big development this evening that is being welcomed, of course, by people right throughout Israel, and that is a hostage, an Israeli female soldier called Ori Megadish, who was being held hostage by Hamas. She was kidnapped on the 7th of October during these attacks. Well, she has been freed in an operation by Israeli Defense Forces into Gaza. So the first success of this ground operation, which of course has its stated aim not just in destroying Hamas, but to try to free those hostages being held. There's a great deal of concern amongst hostage families and indeed even people in Israel about the potential for the ground operation actually maybe to do more harm than good. Going in there, could it risk the lives of those hostages? We know that the go-ahead for the ground operation was taken after diplomats had fed back to the Israeli War Cabinet that the hostage negotiation talks between Qatar and Hamas had stalled, that Hamas was just playing for time. And then the decision was taken to launch the ground operation that we're seeing now. Well, a poll just in the last few days of Israeli citizens showed that about half agreed that there maybe should be a pause in that ground operation to allow more talks for those hostage negotiations. But I think this will be seized on by the Israeli government and the Israeli Defense Forces as one sign that that ground operation can have its successes, it can lead to hostages being freed, and that's exactly what they've done, being able to rescue this Israeli soldier.
Mark, thank you very much. Mark White there, our security editor, who's in Tel Aviv for us, hitting a couple of different stories there. That one that Conservative MP Paul Bristow has been asked to leave his government post after calling for a ceasefire. We'll have a bit more on that. But back to the streets of Britain, OK, because for the third weekend in a row, we saw massive protests. Since then, there's been calls for the terror threat to be increased. We've had the odd little Christmas event being cancelled. I say little, the largest ice skating event at Kensington Palace has been cancelled because of security fears. Oh, we're not quite in November yet, are we? But they're cancelling things in the run-up to Christmas. Yeah, why is that really? There's serious concerns from the Met Police saying we need more clarity on what is extremism and what's terror. I mean, can I politely suggest that maybe people calling for jihad on the streets of Britain is tantamount to extremism, but, you know, who am I to say? But someone who knows all too much about extremism is Vahid Beheshti, who's a protester, activist and an Iranian dissident. Vahid, thank you very, very much for joining us. I know we tried to get you earlier and we couldn't quite manage to lock you down in terms of connection. You were there, I believe, with another regular on the show, Maya Tusi, who's a political commentator, friend of the channel, at the weekend. And you saw some quite violent clashes in London, didn't you? Could you talk to us about what you saw, please?
It was outrageous this weekend, you know, so they gone so far into that point which they attacking our police officers just outside our camp, about 20 meters away from our camp here. They hit the police officers with the object, and the police officers, as far as I saw, is gone unconscious. So I don't understand how we allow these people to act like that in the street of London. But I am not surprised by that. Let me again tell you this, because for past 17, 18 years, me and my other human rights activists, we've been warning our leaders about the expansion of extremism here in this country, because we allow the organizations, terrorist organizations like IRGC to be active on our soil. 2 months ago, Jewish Chronicle revealed one conference which has been held in UK, which one of the IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps from Iran, was giving a speech to our youth here in UK and brainwashing our youth. So we have a big problem with extremism, and they cannot accuse me with Islamophobia or with anti-immigration, because I am talking as a Muslim and I'm talking as someone who's an immigrant. But we have a big problem in this country. We have a big problem with our immigration system. We have to know, if we are going to let people in, we have to know their background. We cannot open our gate just like that here. But we are facing this problem. What we are facing in the street of London and other cities, unfortunately, I have to give this news to your audience. It's going to get worse and worse in next coming week. But
Look,
Vahid,
on that, I am, and this is one of the reasons why I am raising money now, justgiving.com/page/GB News Poppy, and I suspect this is the reason why we've already exceeded our original target by 314% in 2 hours. Amazing. It's because a lot of our viewers and a lot of our listeners are absolutely terrified that we're going to see in a couple of weeks' time a massive issue with protesters on Remembrance Sunday in this country, where it's a day to honour our veterans, it's a day for patriotism, it's a day for remembrance, it's a day for Britain, and Britain around the world as well. And that we're going to see an undercurrent of people who actually wish Britain serious harm. And you seem to be quite fearful that that is coming.
Thank you. Yes. Well, let me use this opportunity, because in my other interviews, I-24 from Israel, I said that 2 days ago. Today, I'm going to invite our intelligence service from UK, and I said from the other countries, but especially our intelligence service in UK. Please follow the money. See where the money comes from in order to organize this massive protest in last 3 Saturday. We have to know where the money comes from in order to organize this protest. Because if you look at the latest speech of the coordinator of IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, 2 days before this Saturday, and the supreme leader of Iranian regime, Ali Khamenei, they called for this. They said, we're calling all our Muslims allies to hit and target the UK's and USA interests in their soil, in their lands, and other European countries. So we have a big problem of extremism here in this country, which we have to look into it very carefully. Otherwise, it's going to be out of control, which I think we are not far.
Yeah, we're not far off. Fahid, look, thank you very much, and thank you for making the time for us today. And I'll talk to you again soon. As Fahid Beheshti, he's a protester, he's an activist, he's an Iranian dissident. Just to summarise, he was witnessing on Saturday some of the clashes between, look, people were saying these are British nationalists against, you know, radicals on the other side. I don't know how you'd bracket it if it's as black and white as that, but extremism breeds extremism. That is what I will say. And we are not clamping down on extremism on the streets in Britain in a way that I think the vast majority of British people would like to see done. And that is going to make extremism on all sides even worse. And we have got now a situation where the cenotaph is being barricaded, where we're going to see, you know, British war heroes, British veterans serving British military personnel walking through the streets in the next couple of weeks, people gearing up for the poppy selling and all of this stuff, and a very, very, very intimidating, hostile atmosphere to that. And I don't like that, and I do not want to have that. And I'm raising money to show that our veterans actually are cared for and are valued, and our British history is cared for and valued. And that is why I'm fundraising, justgiving.com/page/GBNewsPoppy. And that appeal has already raised now £32,263 in the last 2 hours and 20 minutes. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Tomorrow, I'm going to be doing my show from Brighton. Why Brighton? Well, because like many other parts of the UK, they struggled to find somebody who would volunteer to sell the poppy. OK, for a combination of different reasons. But I thought, well, we're not having that. So we're going to go to Brighton tomorrow. We're going to try and sell a few poppies, see what we can, and try and raise a bit of money for the Royal British Legion, who do a lot for our armed forces, who do a lot for the families of people in our armed forces, who tries to get veterans some housing, who tries to get them some mental health care. I'm very concerned about the state of this country at the minute, and this is something that we can do, and you are doing. So thank you to put a bit of money right in the pockets of people who care for veterans, who care for Britain. gbnews.com/page/GBNewsPoppy, a whopping 32 grand already. Thank you. Fantastic stuff. That says a heck of a lot about the people who watch and listen to this show. Thank you. Now, coming up, the growing divisions within the Labour Party over the Gaza conflict. Yes, now Sir Keir Starmer is facing the biggest challenge to his leadership yet, apparently. Patrick Christys, GB News, Britain's News Channel. Stay tuned.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
This time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Put your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back, Patrick Christys here on GB News. It is just about to go 5:25. Well, it appears Gaza might be the issue that tears Sir Keir Starmer's Labour Party apart, as mayors and councillors and shadow ministers urge the leadership to back calls for a ceasefire. Now, the government also faces its own rebellion, as PPS Paul Bristow is told to quit over backing calls for a ceasefire in Gaza. So a Number 10 spokeswoman said Paul Bristow has been asked to leave his government post following comments that were not consistent with the principles of collective responsibility. Well, this is interesting. So Paul Bristow is the Tory MP for Peterborough, part of Peterborough anyway, and he has come out and called for a ceasefire. Now, it's fascinating because Paul has quite a large Muslim population there, which he's very active in and he's very ingrained in, and you know, are very active in voting for it, frankly. OK? We know that the Labour Party has seen a load of Labour councillors resign and quit over their stance, not calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. And it also ties in, for me, with something that was spotted at the weekend by, initially, the Daily Express, which may have gone under the radar here. So a party of Islam is looking to be registered with the Electoral Commission. It submitted an application to the Electoral Commission, and it promises to, quote, help all of the minority in the land of Great Britain have a voice. It goes on to say, we will make sure that all problems which linger... I'm not responsible for the grammar of this, by the way. We will make sure that all problems which linger in the great country of Great Britain is defeated. Right, OK. Now, there's a sizable number of seats, believed to be around 30 Labour seats, that are heavily reliant on the Muslim vote, OK? If they decide to go and vote for a party of Islam, Labour could be in massive trouble in those seats. And, as we're seeing now, some Conservative MPs potentially breaking ranks as well. I think this poses a really interesting question as to what may happen at the next general election. Would this dent Labour's chances of an outright majority? I mean, this could, in theory, yield seats for a new party in this country, the Party of Islam. What does that mean? A religious-based party in this country potentially getting seats at the next general election. Look, it's a long way off in terms of it actually coming to fruition, and a lot can happen. Good grief, if a week is a long time in politics, then certainly the best part of a year is, isn't it? And anything can happen. Politics may change. Parties may make a different stance on what's going on in Israel and Gaza at the moment. But I just think that is one to watch that. It's one to watch that. If plenty of seats in this country could be turned by a so-called Party of Islam. And what would that mean for Britain going forward, do you think, if we had an overtly religious-based party gaining seats at the House of Commons? Is that something that people should feel concerned about? Is it something that's just an expression of democratic process? If we have people in this nation who are willing to vote for a party that explicitly has religious fundamentalism at its core. I suppose that is their democratic right, is it not? But get your views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. The UK terror threat is, of course, remaining at substantial as well, meaning that an attack is likely, as ministers have today attended an emergency Cobra meeting amid fears of the ongoing situation in the Middle East and that it could spill over into UK domestic terror threats. We've had Suella Braverman talking earlier on, but on this exact note, I'm going to take you live right now to Israel's leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, who is currently talking and giving the nation an update.
They committed the most horrific crimes imaginable. And they're part of the axis of evil that Iran has formed, an axis of terror that works by arming, training, and financing Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and other terror proxies throughout the Middle East and beyond the Middle East. In fighting Hamas and the Iranian axis of terror, Israel is fighting the enemies of civilization itself. Victory over these enemies begins with moral clarity. It begins with knowing the difference between good and evil, between right and wrong. It means making a moral distinction between the deliberate murder of the innocent and the unintentional casualties that accompany every legitimate war, even the most just war. It means holding Hamas responsible for the double war crime it commits every day by deliberately targeting Israeli civilians while deliberately using Palestinian civilians as human shields. It means making clear that the use of human shields is not only an immoral tactic of terror, but also an ineffective one. Because as long as Hamas's use of Palestinian human shields result in the international community blaming Israel, Hamas will continue to use it as a tool of terror, and so will others. Hamas will continue to use the basements in Gaza's hospitals as the command posts of its vast terror tunnel network. It will continue to use mosques as fortified military positions and weapon depots. It will continue to steal fuel and humanitarian assistance from UN facilities. While Israel is doing everything to get Palestinians, civilians, out of harm's way, Hamas is doing everything to keep Palestinian civilians in harm's way. Israel urges Palestinian civilians to leave the areas of armed conflict, while Hamas prevents those civilians from leaving those areas at gunpoint. Hamas is also preventing foreign nationals from leaving Gaza altogether. And most despicably, Hamas is holding over 200 Israeli hostages, including 33 children, holding them, terrorizing them, keeping them as hostages. Every civilized nation should stand with Israel in demanding that these hostages be freed immediately and freed unconditionally. I want to make clear Israel's position regarding a ceasefire. Just as the United States would not agree to a ceasefire after the bombing of Pearl Harbor or after the terrorist attack of 9/11, Israel will not agree to a cessation of hostilities with Hamas after the horrific attacks of October 7th. Calls for a ceasefire are calls for Israel to surrender to Hamas, to surrender to terrorism, to surrender to barbarism. That will not happen. Ladies and gentlemen, the Bible says that there is a time for peace and a time for war. This is a time for a war for our common future. Today, we draw a line between the forces of civilization and the forces of barbarism. It is a time for everyone to decide where they stand. Israel will stand against the forces of barbarism until victory. I hope and pray that civilized nations everywhere will back this fight. Because Israel's fight is your fight. Because if Hamas and Iran's axis of evil win, you will be their next target. That's why Israel's victory will be your victory. But make no mistake, regardless of who stands with Israel, Israel will fight until this battle is won, and Israel will prevail. May God bless Israel, and may God bless all those who stand with Israel.
OK, it's Benjamin Netanyahu there, the Israeli Prime Minister, just giving an update on the latest in the war He was saying that Israel will win, that they're going to destroy Hamas. He was making it abundantly clear that Hamas is the one that's trapping civilians there, and that it is Hamas responsible for civilian deaths, and it's stopping people from fleeing, essentially that it's holding people hostage there at the moment. So that was Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu giving an update on both Hamas and the state of play when it comes to the conflict. So that's the very latest from Israel. We'll bring you more on it, of course, as we get it. Can I just do a little bit of a rewind here on the latest from Britain streets as well, just before we went to Benjamin Netanyahu there, because I was going to play you the latest from Suella Braverman, our Home Secretary, who I'm hoping I might be able to fill you in on. So it's been a big day for the UK terror threat and for extremism on the streets of Britain over here as a result of what we're seeing and what we're hearing going on. They're showing no signs of stopping, obviously, with Israel and Hamas. So Suella Braverman attended an emergency COBRA meeting. There was talk of whether or not we were going to raise the terror threat. We're seeing the police now calling for clarity on what is extremism, what can they arrest somebody for, what can they get a realistic prosecution for. Our Home Secretary did not mince her words after there were clashes on the streets of Britain for a third week in a row. Here's what she said.
Let me explain what we've seen over the last few weekends. We've seen now tens of thousands of people take to the streets following the massacre of Jewish people, the single largest loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust, chanting for the erasure of Israel from the map. To my mind, there's only one way to describe those marches. They are hate marches.
Now, contrast those hate marches, as she calls it, with what we're going to see in a couple of weeks, which is Remembrance Sunday, which is members of our armed forces and their families and everybody walking through the streets of London past that same cenotaph that is currently barricaded off to protect it from protesters defecating and desecrating it and all of that stuff, OK? Terrible scenes. I've got a Just Giving page going on at the moment to show our veterans some love. JustGiving.com/page/GB News Poppy. I'm doing a show tomorrow from Brighton where we're going to do a bit of poppy selling and we're going to be trying to drum up a bit of support there. Why? Because Brighton, which is regarded as many as Britain's wokest area, was struggling initially to find somebody to go and sell the poppy there, which is a sign of the times, I think. I asked for 10 grand. We have hit £41,000. You have hit £41,000. Jim says we owe so much to our veterans. Jim's tucked in a tenner. JustGiving.com/page/GB News Poppy. Tom also given 10 quid. Brilliant thing to do. He says, great work. Those who died for us deserve the world, says Teresa, who's given 50 quid. But there's some other little donations as well, which mean the absolute world as well. You can throw in 2 quid. You can throw in a fiver. You can throw in anything. Keith in Bradford has given 50 quid. Thank you. Donna's given a fiver. Thank you very much. Now, I would argue, you know, more than ever in recent times that I can think of, I think we need to show where our priorities lie as a nation, what we're really about here, all right? There are a lot of good patriotic Brits out there who really do care about our armed forces and care about our national history and want to show that. And now I think is the time to do it. JustGiving.com/page/GB News Poppy. Thank you a million times. Thank you for everybody for smashing it out of the park. Right, I've got loads more coming your way, including how do we prevent criminals from reoffending? That is a question that has had people scratching their heads for years. But Justice Secretary Alex Chalk thinks he's got the answer. Under his plans, convicted burglars and drug dealers will not have to disclose their past crimes to employers, something that he thinks will show that we can get them back into employment. More on this very shortly. Patrick Christys, GB News. Stay tuned.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new t-shirt. It's your new t-shirt. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio. OK, so look, how do we prevent criminals from reoffending? That is a question that has had people scratching their heads for years. Now, our Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, he thinks he's cracked it. He thinks that under his plans, convicted burglars and drug dealers will not have to disclose their past crimes to employers. So, I mean, it's not quite lying, is it? It's just not telling them the truth, and that might help them get a job more easily. Well, I suppose it will, because you won't know that they're a criminal. So there's that, isn't there? Is this a feasible plan? To debate this, I'm joined now by reformed burglar Lennox Rogers and former senior investigating officer at the Met Police, Simon Harding. Chaps, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. Right, Lennox, I'll start with you. What do you think about this, then? Lennox? Is it a good idea? Can you hear me, Lennox? No, I'm not getting Lennox. Right, we're going to go over, whilst we desperately try to sort that out, to go to Simon Harding, who I'm hoping can hear me. Simon, is this a good idea?
I think in principle, I mean, you know, you understand the rationale for it. You know, the length of time that the conviction has to expire before you can then say that you have a clean slate is many years, you know, and has been for a while. So I think, you know, this idea of less reoffending and less victims is a good thing, obviously. The more people that are put into work rather than, you know, can't get work, and so the only way of getting money is to resort to crime, of course, you know, it has to be a good thing. But, you know, at the heart of this as well are you know, when you look at these offences, it's very difficult to really group these offences together and say that, you know, burglary is almost being sort of, you know, put down the scale a little bit. You know, burglaries can be devastating to families. You know, you are violated in your own home, and it can be devastating. And the financial loss of thefts, you know, things like that. So, but I think in general, I would say that, yeah, it probably is a good idea. The length of time is too much.
OK, I believe we can bring Lennox back in now. Lennox, I hope you can hear me now. It's good. Yeah, there we go. That's a happy face. Right, OK, so, look, with respect, Lennox, if I wanted to employ you, should I have a right to know about your criminal past, do you think?
I think it's good if it was spent, and
given what the government are trying to do, I think if they made the application process a bit less intrusive, it would give people a chance. But I think that criminals do deserve a chance if they want to live a changed life. So I would be hoping that employers would give people a chance.
I know that some employers, I'll stay with you, Lennox, if that's all right. I know that some employers, I believe Timpson's and I think Iceland as well, do have quite prominent schemes, right, where they do help people who have maybe just got out of prison or are going through some kind of parole or something like that, probation, I should say. I suppose the question for me would be, if an employer doesn't know that somebody has got a history of burglary or theft or something, and then they put them in a position within their company where they might have access to the tills, is it not just a risk? And then that employer might end up, you know, falling foul of that and thinking, well, you should have told me. Some people also might say, Lennox, that, to be fair, if you do commit a crime, you have to have that deterrent of thinking, well, I might not be able to get a job after I've got a criminal record, you know? What would you say to that?
Well, that's true. I think if someone has just come out of prison, say, I think that they also deserve a chance. But perhaps if the application process was less intrusive, that they didn't have to lie, but they've paid their debt to society and they want a chance, and perhaps reducing the spent time. You know, but yeah, I do feel that there's some protection does need to happen for employers.
OK, and yeah, I'll throw it back to you then, Simon. Do you reckon that at the moment we're almost trapping people in a vortex of continued crime? Because if you get done for something when you're 17 or 18 years old and it stays on your record for a period of time and you can't get a job after that and you need a bit of money, there's probably one or two ways you're going to go and do that, and it's not always legal, is it?
I think that's right. I think this, you know, as a police officer, you know, you were convicting people all the time, and you know, you thought, well, that's what they deserve. They've decided to commit that, but there are different reasons why people commit crime, and there are also different types of crime within one crime itself. And I think, you know, I think cases have to be looked at individually. And one of the things you pick up from the government report is that it says serious sexual offences. So let's talk about how we're trying to, you know, prevent violence against women and girls. So are we saying that those minor sexual offences that we've seen, obviously, police officers committing in the last year or so, and we've found out about, are those the ones that are going to be almost, you know, you don't have to disclose that kind of thing? Then you're put into contact with people who could be vulnerable. And of course, not in terms of those DBS things, but I think there's a lot individual crimes that, you know, just blanket in one crime to say, just make that minor is very difficult.
All right. Lennox, can I ask you a bit about your own experience, please? So just a bit about your backstory. So in terms of, you know, when you were not the reformed character that you are now, what was going on there for you? What happened? What happened in terms of prison time, getting a job afterwards? Go on.
Yeah, it was very difficult to get a job. You know, I was in gangs. I'd committed all sorts of crimes, and I struggled to get a job. And we used to, I used to at one stage have to sort of give false information to some companies, warehouses and things to get jobs. It was very difficult because I'd just come out of prison on occasion and I'm trying to rebuild my life, and it was so hard. But if it was made a bit easier, it would have helped me a lot to, you know, turn my life around a lot sooner, I suppose. As with some of the young people I'm working with now, they're struggling to get jobs because, you know, there's so many hoops they have to jump through. And I think that we need to give them some help to be able to rebuild their life. They want to change.
I'm just going to give the last word to you, Lennox, on this, if that's all right. When you had got out of prison for, you know, whatever it was, did it then, and you struggled to get a job because you were having to lie or whatever about your criminal record, did that then at any point lead to you reoffending, do you think?
In some circumstances, yeah. It was very difficult when you're released at Christmas. There's a lot of pressure on you to have to try and buy presents and things. You've got £40-odd discharge grant until you get dole money, and it was very difficult. So the temptation was hard. Criminals offered you work, armed robberies, burglaries, drug dealing, and it was very difficult to turn down that kind of money when you needed so much help.
Yeah, I can imagine. You know, it's a fascinating topic. It is a fascinating topic because I can really see both sides of this. But can I just say thank you very much, chaps? I could have carried this on for another hour or so, actually, but we have got other bits and bobs to talk about. As reformed burglar there, Lennox Rogers, a former senior investigating officer at the Met Police, Simon Hardy. Get your views coming in on this. I think it might divide people. gbviews@gbnews.com. Now, look, last week, OK, shifting tone this, people. Last week, we spoke about Britain's loneliest sheep, a ewe which had been spotted all alone and overgrown in the Scottish Highlands. But despite GB News' inbox being flooded with concerned emails, some of which genuinely were demanding that we, in fact, me personally, went out and rescued this sheep, it seems that the ewe might have to face another winter on her own. So the Scottish SPCA says that the sheep that's said to be living at the foot of a cliff for the past 2 years now isn't in danger and has ample grazing. Jennifer White is a senior media and communications manager at PETA, who joins us now. Thank you very much, Jennifer. Look, should we be rescuing this sheep?
Well, to our understanding, there have been several rescue attempts, but because of the isolated location, the rugged terrain, the unpredictable weather, it's just not been safe to do so. But the Scottish SPCA have said that they're going to continuously check in on the sheep when weather allows, and that they are going to work to find a solution. And of course, we really hope that they do, because she deserves to be rescued.
Yeah, I mean, loneliness. Surely, this sheep on its own, there was a quite harrowing tale of a kayaker that said the sheep was bleating at her, you know.
Yeah.
It is genuinely, it is moving. I know I'm kind of laughing a little bit, but it's kind of an awkward laugh because it is actually really quite depressing, this.
It is. And, you know, sheep are incredibly intelligent, complex animals, and they do feel a wide range of emotions, including loneliness. So we know that this sheep is suffering, and that's why it's so important that when it's safe to do so, she is rescued. And, you know, while, of course, it is very important that she has access to grazing land and to water, that isn't enough for a sheep to live a happy and fulfilling life. You know, they are flock animals, and they're incredibly social.
The thing is, it's going to need a bit of TLC. That sheep is, it's a shaggy sheep at the moment. It's certainly not been sheared. It's not seen a barber for a while, to be fair. I mean, the thing is as well, I imagine that eventually that is going to pose it some health problems. I mean, carting that kind of fleece around with you is, it's not, I would argue, probably not what it's supposed to be doing, maybe. So it is going to need a little bit of TLC, isn't it, Jennifer?
Yeah, I mean, we really hope that eventually she'll be retired to a sanctuary where she can live with other sheep and, of course, you know, get a very gentle shearing. But unfortunately, the reason that sheep end up in this state is because they are deliberately bred to produce such an excessive amount of fleece so that people can farm it and obviously turn it into wool and wool products. So we'd urge anyone who, you know, feels sad and depressed for this sheep to show that compassion to all sheep by never wearing wool or eating their flesh and, you know, ultimately going vegan.
Well, fair enough. I mean, hey, your view, obviously, I mean, when you do look at a completely isolated, lonely sheep bleating out into the abyss, it does make you question certain things, I must say. Jennifer, thank you very much. Jennifer White, there, Senior Media and Communications Manager at PETA. I just feel like maybe at some point there has to be some kind of GB News fundraiser to get this sheep. Maybe I'm just being too soft. Especially considering that I do eat lamb. So there is that, isn't there? Talking of campaigns and fundraisers and things like that, I'm going to round off the show with this, OK? We have decided here to, in light of everything that's going on at the moment with this country, and I think quite intense divisions and pictures of the cenotaph, the war memorial being barricaded off to protect it from being desecrated and protect it from vandals, and, you know, footage of people climbing on statues such as some war heroes amongst other great Brits throughout history, and letting off flares and shouting about how awful Britain is in the world and we've got blood on our hands and all of this stuff, right? I thought, you know what? Our veterans need a bit of a boost. They need to be shown how loved they are. And I saw a story that in Brighton, they couldn't get somebody to replace a long-standing poppy seller. That poppy seller managed to raise 10 grand for the Royal British Legion last year. So I thought, I'll go to Brighton and try and sell a few poppies and do a few bits and bobs. So I'm going there to do the show tomorrow, right? And we were initially saying, let's try to raise 10 grand then. Let's try and replace that 10 grand for the Royal British Legion by setting up a Just Giving page called justgiving.com/page/GBNews Poppy. That's justgiving.com/page/GBNews Poppy. We wanted to raise 10 grand. You have raised 53,159 quid. That's the latest that I've got in front of me right now. In fact, make that £53,759 in under 3 hours. You are wonderful people. I love every single one of you. Thank you to everyone who's given from 2 quid to 200 quid. Justgiving.com/page/GBNews Poppy. When we look around the country at the moment, I think it's important to remember how many people there are out there who actually bloody love Britain and love our veterans and love our history. I think we feel like we're under attack at the minute. I certainly do. And it's stuff like this that makes your voice heard. So thank you very, very much. I will see you tomorrow from Brighton. Let's sell some poppies, people.
Good evening, it's Alex Burkill here with your latest GB News weather forecast. And whilst for many the unsettled theme continues through the next 24 hours, it's a drier but chillier picture for Scotland. And that's because of a brief ridge of high pressure which is quietening the weather down a little bit here. Meanwhile, the rest of the UK under the influence of a low pressure centred over Republic of Ireland. That's bringing then heavy showery rain to many parts of England, Wales and particularly eastern parts of Northern Ireland. Heavy rain building up here overnight, could be up to 100 millimetres perhaps, which is why some impacts are likely. Drier weather across parts of Scotland, a touch of frost likely here, milder further south, but with that a few patches of mist and fog are possible first thing on Tuesday morning. Tuesday then is going to be a changeable day with further showery rain across parts of Northern Ireland, Northern England into Wales, a drier slot for a time before more wet and windy weather arrives from the southwest later on. Meanwhile, across Scotland, here it is looking mostly dry, plenty of sunshine too, but quite chilly. Temperatures struggling here in single digits, milder further south with highs of around 14 or 15 Celsius. If you're going trick-or-treating through Tuesday evening, watch out for a band of rain pushing its way up from the southwest, drier towards the north, but more unsettled weather is on the way this week as Storm Ciaran approaches, most affecting southern areas as we go through Wednesday night into Thursday, bringing some heavy rain, but it's the exceptionally strong winds, particularly around Channel coastal parts, which we're most concerned about.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Put your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't